I never imagined that my own father would sell me out in front of my entire family on Christmas Eve. But there I was sitting at that table for the first time in 10 years when he stood up, tapped his wine glass, and announced to everyone in the room that I was worth $13.6 million. The gasps, the stares, the instant greed in their eyes. Then came his ultimatum. You owe us half. Payment for the 18 years we raised you. Give us what we deserve, or leave this family forever. He had a lawyer there, documents ready. He'd planned this ambush for months. My own brother smirked from across the table, already spending my money in his head. My mother sat frozen silent as always. They thought I'd break. Thought I'd sign away everything I'd built from nothing just to earn their approval one more time. But I did something they never expected. I stood up, walked outside into the freezing night, and made one phone call. By the next morning, my phone had 112 missed calls, panicked voicemails, threats, bribes, begging, because what my father didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been ready for this moment for years. And the secret I'd been sitting on, it didn't just protect me, it destroyed them. This is the story of how my family tried to steal everything I built, and how I made sure they'd never forget the daughter they threw away. Stay until the end, because the truth about why my father really hated me will leave you speechless. My name is Melissa Harper, and I'm 38 years old now. I run a successful home goods company that I built from absolutely nothing. But this story doesn't start with my success. It starts in a small house on Maple Street, where I learned very early that some children are loved and others are simply tolerated. I was 8 years old the first time my father handed me a laundry basket and said, "This is your job now." Not a request, a command. While my brother Evan, just 6 at the time, sat in front of the television with a bowl of ice cream, I stood on a step stool in front of the washing machine reading the detergent instructions and trying to figure out which setting meant what. My mother watched from the doorway but said nothing. She never did. By the time I was 10, I knew how to cook a full dinner. Spaghetti on Mondays, chicken casserole on Wednesdays, meatloaf on Fridays. I knew which grocery stores had sales, how to stretch a pound of ground beef into 2 meals, and exactly how my father liked his coffee. 2 sugars, splash of milk never too hot. I knew how to scrub bathroom tiles until they gleamed, how to iron my father's work shirts without leaving creases, and how to make myself invisible when his mood turned dark. Evan never lifted a finger. Not once. When he left his dishes on the table, I washed them. When he tracked mud through the house, I mopped it. When he forgot his homework, my mother drove to school to deliver it while I stayed home and made dinner. He was the golden child, the boy who could do no wrong, the future of the family. And I was just the help. Girls need to learn these things, my father would say, watching me fold laundry at 11 o'clock on a school night. You're not special, Melissa. You're average. The sooner you accept that, the better off you'll be. Average. That word became the soundtrack of my childhood. School was my only escape, the one place where effort actually mattered. I threw myself into my classes with desperate intensity, staying up late to finish assignments after all the housework was done, studying during lunch while other kids socialized. I made honor roll every single semester, straight A's year after year. When I was 15, I won a regional science fair with a project on water filtration systems. The local paper ran a small article with my photo. My father glanced at it over breakfast and said, "Don't let this go to your head. You did what you were supposed to do." That's it. No congratulations, no pride. Just a reminder that meeting expectations wasn't worthy of celebration. Meanwhile, Evan brought home a report card with 3 C's and 2 D's, and my father took him out for pizza and bought him a new video game system. "He's trying his best," Dad said when I asked why Evan got rewarded for mediocrity. "Not everyone is good at school, but he's got other talents." I never discovered what those talents were. When I earned a partial scholarship to the State University at 17, I was euphoric. It was my ticket out, my chance at a different life. I brought the letter home shaking with excitement, imagining for just a moment that maybe this time my father would see me, really see me. He read the letter, handed it back, and said, "Congratulations. You'll still need to cover half the tuition. I'm not paying for it." "But the financial aid forms," I stammered. "You just have to sign them. It wouldn't cost you anything. You're not worth the investment. He interrupted, his voice flat and final. If you want to go to college so badly, you'll figure it out yourself. That's what average people do. They figure it out. I looked at my mother silently, begging her to intervene, to advocate, to do something. She looked down at her coffee cup, gripping it so tightly her knuckles went white. She had no access to the bank accounts, no credit cards in her name, no ability to help even if she'd wanted to. My father controlled every dollar that came into that house, and she'd learned long ago that challenging him meant punishment, sometimes financial, sometimes worse. That night I lay in my small bedroom and understood with crystal clarity that I was alone, truly, completely alone. No one in this house would ever fight for me, believe in me, or see me as anything more than free labor and a disappointment. I also understood something else, something that would shape everything that came after. If I was going to survive, I had to stop waiting for their love and start building my own worth. Not the worth they assigned to me, but the worth I knew I had buried deep beneath years of being told I was average. I got a job waitressing at a diner that summer, then a second job cleaning offices on weekends. I saved every dollar, sleeping 4 hours a night, working myself to exhaustion. My father didn't ask where I was or what I was doing. As long as dinner was on the table and the house stayed clean, I was invisible to him. Evan, meanwhile, had just turned 16. My father bought him a used car for his birthday, nothing fancy, but it ran. When I asked if I could borrow it sometimes to get to work, my father laughed. "You can take the bus, builds character." I took the bus, in rain, snow, and summer heat. 2 transfers each way. Looking back now, I can see it so clearly, the systematic way my father ground down my sense of self, the casual cruelty disguised as preparation for the real world, the way my mother's silence became its own form of abandonment. I can see how every message delivered daily for years taught me that I had to work twice as hard to be worth half as much. But at the time, I just thought it was normal. I thought every girl grew up knowing she was fundamentally less valuable than her brother. I thought every daughter learned that love was conditional, earned through service and silence. I had no idea that the real reason for my father's contempt ran far deeper than simple misogyny or preference for sons. And yet I had no idea the injustice had started long before I was born. There were photographs missing from our house. I noticed it when I was about 9 years old, visiting a friend's home and seeing her hallway lined with family pictures, grandparents, cousins, weddings, holidays. Our walls were bare, except for a single portrait of my father's parents, stern-faced people I'd met only twice before they died. "Where are Mom's family photos?" I asked one evening while setting the table. My father's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. The silence that followed felt dangerous, like the air before a thunderstorm. "We don't talk about them," he said, his voice tight and controlled. "That subject is closed in this house." My mother's face went pale. She stared down at her plate and said nothing. I learned quickly that certain topics were forbidden. My mother's maiden name, her childhood, and especially her mother, my grandmother, whose name I only knew because I'd once glimpsed it on an old Christmas card shoved in the back of a kitchen drawer. Eleanor Ross. But fragments slipped through anyway in unguarded moments. Late one night when I was 11, I came downstairs for water and found my mother sitting alone in the dark kitchen, crying silently. I'd never seen her cry before. She was always so controlled, so careful. I stood frozen in the doorway, not knowing if I should retreat or comfort her. She looked up startled and quickly wiped her eyes. "I'm fine, honey, just tired." "Mom," I whispered, moving closer. "Are you okay?" She studied my face for a long moment, something complicated moving behind her eyes. Then she said so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "You look just like her, my mother. You have her eyes, her stubborn chin." A sad smile touched her lips. "She would have loved you so much." "Where is she?" I asked. "Gone," my mother said, and her voice broke on the word. "She died when you were 2. Your father forbade me from going to the funeral. Said if I went, he'd change the locks and I'd never see my children again." She looked at me with hollow eyes. "I chose you and Evan. I stayed, but I never got to say goodbye to her." "Why would Dad do that?" I asked, confused and frightened by the rawness in her voice. She just shook her head. "Go back to bed, Melissa, and please don't mention this conversation to your father." I didn't. But I started paying closer attention. I noticed how my father's jaw would clench if my mother's family was mentioned even tangentially, how he'd cut off any story she started that began with, "when I was young," how he seemed to watch me sometimes with something that looked less like disappointment and more like active hatred. When I was 12, everything came into sharper focus. I was supposed to be asleep, but I'd come downstairs to get my math textbook from the living room. I heard them arguing in the kitchen, my father's voice rising with a venom I'd never heard before. "She's exactly like your mother," he snarled. "That same stubborn, self-righteous attitude, that same look in her eyes like she's judging me, like she sees right through me and finds me wanting." "She's 12 years old," my mother said, her voice shaking. "She's a child. She's got that gene, that stubborn Ross gene. Your mother had it, you have it, and you passed it to the girl. Every time I look at her, I see Eleanor staring back at me, telling me I'm not good enough. My mother was right about—" My mother's voice cut off abruptly, and I heard a crash like a glass slamming on the counter. "Don't," my father warned, his voice dropping to something cold and terrible. "Don't you dare finish that sentence." The silence stretched. Then my mother spoke again, defeated. "I'm sorry. You should be. Eleanor tried to destroy us before we even started. She tried to turn you against me, tried to convince you to leave. Well, she's gone now, and I made damn sure her poison didn't spread. But every time I look at that girl upstairs, I'm reminded of the woman who called me a controlling small man who would make you miserable." My heart pounded so hard I thought they'd hear it. "Melissa is innocent," my mother whispered. "She's done nothing to deserve—" "She exists," my father interrupted. "That's enough." I crept back upstairs, my whole body shaking. I didn't understand all of it, but I understood enough. My grandmother had seen something in my father, something that made her oppose him, and because I looked like her, because I reminded him of her, he hated me for it. It wasn't about my grades or my chores or my potential. It was something older, deeper, more immovable than anything I could change about myself. Over the next few years, I pieced together more fragments. A cousin mentioned at a family gathering that my grandmother had been quite the firecracker, never took anything from anyone. And an old neighbor once commented that it was such a shame my mother had lost touch with her family. Each piece added to a picture of a woman who'd been strong, outspoken, and ultimately erased from our lives. And I was her ghost haunting my father's house. The worst part wasn't the hatred itself. It was the realization that nothing I did would ever change it. I could be perfect, obedient, invisible. It didn't matter. The crime I'd committed was being born with the wrong face, the wrong spirit, the wrong bloodline. Some hatreds run too deep for reason. But that resentment would soon change my entire life. The scholarship letter arrived 3 weeks before my 18th birthday. I held it in my trembling hands in the school counselor's office, reading the words over and over, partial merit scholarship covering 60% of tuition. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. With financial aid and my savings from 2 years of waitressing, I could actually do this. I could leave. Mrs. Patterson, my counselor, smiled warmly. Your father just needs to sign the FAFSA forms and provide his tax information. It's standard procedure. Bring these home tonight, and we'll submit everything by the deadline. I nodded, clutching the folder to my chest like a lifeline. That evening, I waited until after dinner, after the dishes were washed and put away, after Evan had disappeared to his room. I found my father in his recliner watching television. My heart hammered as I approached. Dad, I need you to sign these. I held out the papers. For college, financial aid. He didn't even look at them. No. The single word hit me like a physical blow. What? I said no. He finally glanced up at me, his expression flat and cold. I'm not signing anything. You want to go to college? Pay for it yourself. But it's just paperwork, I said, desperation creeping into my voice. It doesn't cost you anything. I just need your signature and tax information. You're not worth the investment of my time or attention, he interrupted, turning back to the television. This conversation is over. I stood there frozen, feeling 18 years of hope crumbling around me. Mom. I turned to where she sat on the couch, her hands folded in her lap. Mom, please. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I saw the war in her eyes, the desire to help crushed by the weight of years of conditioning. Your father has made his decision, she whispered. That's when I understood. She had no power here, no bank account, no credit cards in her name, no ability to help even if her heart was breaking. She was as trapped as I was. I went upstairs, sat on my bed, and planned. I had $2.847 in my savings account from 2 years of work. It wasn't enough for even one semester, but maybe I could take a gap year, work full-time, save more. I'd find a way. I had to. But I didn't get the chance. 3 days later, my father came home early from work. His face twisted with rage. He stormed into the house and grabbed me by the arm, dragging me into the kitchen where my mother and Evan were sitting. You want to explain this? He threw his wallet on the table. $60 missing. $60 that was there this morning. My stomach dropped. I didn't take anything from your wallet. Liar. His voice exploded through the kitchen. You've been stealing from me to fund your little college dream. I should have known you'd stoop this low. Dad, I swear I didn't. I saw her, Evan said quietly from his chair. His voice was calm, almost sympathetic, but his eyes were cold. Yesterday morning, she was going through your wallet when you were in the shower. The betrayal hit me like ice water. I stared at my brother, this person I'd protected and cleaned up after my entire life, and saw the lie sitting comfortably on his face. He'd stolen that money probably for drugs or gambling or whatever he was into now, and he was throwing me under the bus without hesitation. Evan, you know that's not true, I said, my voice shaking. He shrugged. I know what I saw. My father's hand slammed on the table, making us all jump. Get out. What? Get out of my house. Each word was bitten off sharp and final. You're 18 now. I've done my legal obligation. I don't owe you another goddamn thing. Pack your stuff and leave. Tonight. Dad, please. I looked at my mother silently, begging. Don't look at her, he snapped. She can't help you. No one can help you. You made your choice when you decided to steal from me. I didn't steal anything. My voice cracked with desperation. You have 20 minutes. Take what you can carry. Everything else stays here. It's mine, bought with my money. I looked at Evan one more time, giving him a chance to take it back, to tell the truth. He looked away. 23 minutes later, I stood on the front porch with 2 garbage bags of clothes, my laptop, and the $347 in cash I'd kept hidden in my room. The March night was brutally cold wind cutting through my jacket. Behind me, the door slammed shut. I heard the deadbolt click into place. I walked to the end of the driveway and stood under the streetlight, shivering with nowhere to go. And then something strange happened. The panic I expected didn't come. Instead, I felt something I'd never experienced in that house: silence. Real silence. Not the tense walking on eggshells quiet of waiting for my father's next criticism, but actual peace. The voice in my head that constantly whispered, not good enough, not worthy, not worth it. His voice was suddenly distant. I took a breath, then another. The cold air hurt my lungs, but it was clean, free. For the first time in 18 years, no one was telling me I was average, worthless, undeserving. No one was watching my every move with contempt. I picked up my bags and started walking toward the bus stop, toward town, toward whatever came next. My hands were shaking, and I had no plan, but I felt something I couldn't quite name yet. Later, I'd recognize it as the first taste of freedom, but the world outside had sharper claws than I imagined. I spent my first night of freedom on a bench at the 24-hour laundromat on 5th Street, my garbage bags pressed against my legs, jumping at every sound. When the sun came up, I went to the diner where I'd been waitressing and begged my manager for extra shifts. She took one look at my face and said, "You can start this morning. Double shifts if you want them." I wanted them. Within a week, I'd cobbled together a survival plan that would have broken most people. I worked breakfast and lunch at the diner 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. Then I'd take the bus across town to the Sunshine Motel, where I cleaned rooms from 3 until 7. After that, I'd walk 4 blocks to Martina's Bakery and help prep dough and clean equipment from 8 until midnight. I'd catch the last bus home, sleep from 1 to 5 in the morning, then do it all again. The room I rented was in Mrs. Kowalski's basement, a space she advertised as a cozy studio that was really just a converted storage area with a hot plate, a mini fridge, and a bathroom the size of a closet. $75 a week, utilities included. The ceiling was so low I could touch it with my fingertips. The single window looked out at the street, letting in the constant noise of traffic and the neon glow from the liquor store across the road. In winter, cold seeped through the concrete walls no matter how high I cranked the ancient space heater. In summer, it became a sweatbox, but it was mine. The first night I slept there, I cried so hard I thought I'd never stop. Not from sadness exactly, but from the overwhelming strangeness of silence. No footsteps overhead that meant my father was coming. No tension crackling through the walls. No voice telling me I'd done something wrong. I could leave dishes in the sink if I wanted. I could sleep past 6 in the morning on my one day off. I could exist without fear. That realization was worth more than heat or space or comfort. The work was brutal. My feet developed calluses on top of calluses from standing all day. My hands were perpetually raw from cleaning chemicals and dishwater. I learned to function on 4 hours of sleep fueled by whatever food I could get for free leftover pancakes from the diner, day-old pastries from the bakery, the occasional burger that a cook made wrong and would otherwise be thrown out. I lost 15 pounds in the first 2 months. My reflection looked haunted, all sharp angles and exhausted eyes, but my mind stayed clear. Sharper even. Without the constant background noise of criticism and contempt, I found I could think, plan, dream even in small, practical ways. It was at the motel where everything started to shift. The Sunshine Motel wasn't glamorous truckers and traveling salespeople, mostly the occasional family on a tight budget. The rooms accumulated damage, broken drawer pulls, wobbly chair legs, lamps that didn't work, picture frames with cracked glass. The owner, Mr. Patel, would just throw the broken items in a storage room and buy cheap replacements. During slow periods between rooms, I started poking through that storage room. I'd grown up fixing things out of necessity. My father refused to pay for repairs, so I'd learned young how to reattach cabinet doors and patch holes in walls. I found tools in the maintenance closet and started tinkering. A loose chair leg just needed wood glue and proper clamping. A drawer pull required a longer screw. A lamp needed rewiring, which I figured out through a library book and careful attention. Mr. Patel noticed the items reappearing in rooms repaired and functional. "You do this?" he asked one day. "I hope that's okay," I said quickly. "I just thought, it's good," he interrupted. "Real good. You keep doing it. I'll knock $10 off your weekly room rent." $10 felt like a fortune. I got bolder. I started refinishing the damaged wooden furniture with sandpaper and stain I bought from the hardware store with my tips. I'd take broken decorative items, vases, picture frames, small boxes, and repair them, sometimes adding decorative touches with paint or fabric scraps I got for free from a craft store's donation bin. One afternoon, a woman in her 70s watched me working on a jewelry box in the motel lobby during my break. The box had been water-damaged, its veneer peeling, and hinges rusted. I'd sanded it down, restained it, replaced the hinges, and lined the interior with fabric. "That's beautiful work," she said. "Would you sell it to me?" I blinked, startled. It's not really mine to sell. It belongs to the motel." She went to Mr. Patel. They talked. He came back and said, "She's offering $45. Take it. It's yours." The woman pressed the cash into my hand and smiled. "You have a gift, honey. Real talent. Don't waste it cleaning motel rooms forever." I stared at the $45, more than I made in an entire shift at the bakery. Something sparked in my chest, a tiny flame of possibility I hadn't felt since the scholarship letter. That night, I sat in my basement room with my laptop and created a free account on an online craft marketplace. I took photos of a small decorative box I'd made from scrap wood and listed it for $60, my full name attached, Melissa Harper. I didn't expect anything to happen, and one evening, a simple online listing changed everything. The notification came through on my phone at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was half asleep on my mattress, still in my bakery clothes, when the chime made me jolt awake. "Your item has sold." I sat up so fast I got dizzy. Hands shaking, I opened the app. Someone had bought the decorative box. $60. After fees, I'd clear $52. More than an entire shift at the diner where I'd stand for 8 hours serving coffee and getting yelled at by impatient customers who tipped in quarters. This was different. Someone had looked at something I'd created, something that came from my hands, my vision, my effort, and decided it had value. Not because I'd followed instructions or met someone else's expectations, but because I'd made something worth wanting. I didn't sleep that night. I went to the storage room at the motel where Mr. Patel let me keep supplies and materials, and I made 3 more boxes. Different sizes, different finishes, each one carefully sanded and stained. I worked until my fingers ached and my eyes burned, fueled by something I hadn't felt in years' hope. By the end of the week, all 3 boxes had sold. By the end of the month, I'd made $700 from my online shop, almost as much as I made from the motel job, and with a fraction of the physical toll. But I knew this was just luck, unless I learned how to do it properly. I'd never been taught anything about business. My father certainly hadn't bothered. Girls didn't need those skills, according to him. But now, driven by desperation and possibility, I became my own teacher. During my breaks at the diner, I watched YouTube videos on my phone about product photography. I learned that natural light mattered, that angles changed everything, that a simple white background made items look more professional. I used a bedsheet thumbtacked to my basement wall and photographed my pieces near the window during my few daylight hours off. Late at night, after my bakery shift, I'd sit on my mattress with my laptop and take free online courses about pricing strategy. I learned about material costs, labor value, market positioning. I discovered that I'd been drastically underpricing my work selling pieces for $60 that should have been listed at $120. I learned about perceived value and scarcity, about writing product descriptions that told a story instead of just listing features. No one had ever taught me I was capable of learning these things. My father's voice still echoed sometimes, telling me I was average, that I lacked potential. But the sales kept coming, and each one was proof that he'd been wrong. The market didn't care about his opinion. Customers didn't know I'd been raised to believe I was worthless. They just saw beautiful objects and wanted to own them. I absorbed everything, like someone who'd been starving. Business terminology, marketing psychology, customer service best practices. I read blogs and articles, took notes in a cheap spiral notebook, tested different approaches, and tracked what worked. The learning itself felt revolutionary, not because someone was forcing me to memorize facts for a test, but because every piece of knowledge translated directly into results I could measure. My shop grew slowly but steadily. 5 sales a week became 10, then 15. I raised my prices. I expanded my product line, making everything from jewelry boxes to decorative trays to small furniture pieces I'd refinish. I developed a signature style, clean lines, rich wood, tones, unexpected pops of color in the interior lining or decorative details. And then 4 months after I'd posted that first listing, I received a message that changed the trajectory of everything. "Hello, I manage purchasing for a boutique hotel chain in the Northeast. I came across your work and I'm very impressed with the craftsmanship and attention to detail. We're renovating one of our locations, and I'd like to commission 20 custom pieces jewelry boxes for the suites and decorative trays for the common areas. Would you be interested in discussing this further?" I read the message 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding. 20 pieces. Custom work for a hotel. We exchanged emails. She sent specifications, photos of the room's color palettes. She asked for my pricing. I did the math, carefully factoring in materials, labor at a rate that actually valued my time, and a small profit margin. $1,200 total. I held my breath and sent the quote, expecting her to laugh or disappear. She responded within an hour. "That's very reasonable. Let's move forward. I'll send a 50% deposit to get you started." $600 appeared in my account 2 days later. I quit the bakery job immediately. I needed the time needed to focus entirely on this order. For 2 weeks I worked like I'd never worked before, but this time, the exhaustion felt different. I wasn't cleaning up someone else's mess or serving people who didn't see me. I was building something. Every piece I completed was proof of what I could do when someone actually gave me a chance. I sanded and stained until my hands were permanently darkened with wood residue. I lined each box with fabric I'd carefully selected, cut and glued with surgical precision. I added small brass hinges that I'd special ordered polished until they gleamed. I wrapped each completed piece in tissue paper and bubble wrap, like it was precious, because to me it was. When I delivered the order, 20 boxes and trays packed carefully into boxes and shipped with tracking, I felt a strange mixture of pride and terror. What if she hated them? What if I'd misunderstood what she wanted? What if this was all a mistake? 3 days later, she called me. "Melissa, I just unpacked everything, and I have to tell you these are stunning, far beyond what I expected. The quality, the finish, the details. You're incredibly talented. I'm placing these in our flagship property, and I've already recommended you to 2 other hotel managers I know." I sat down on my mattress phone pressed to my ear and tried not to cry. "You have real skill," she continued. "Vision. This isn't just craft work, this is artistry. Don't undersell yourself. You're worth far more than you're charging." After we hung up, I sat in the silence of my basement room and understood something profound. I'd found something my father could never take away from me. Not praise I needed to earn through perfection, not love I had to beg for, but skill, vision, and value I'd built with my own hands and mind. Something that existed independent of his opinion, his approval, his acknowledgement. I'd created worth that came from within myself, but that customer wasn't just any customer. The hotel manager's name was Linda Carter, and she wanted to meet me in person. "I'm going to be in town next week for a conference," she said over the phone. "Would you have time for coffee? I'd love to discuss some future projects, and honestly, I'd just like to meet the artist behind these beautiful pieces." We met at a small cafe downtown on a gray November afternoon. I arrived 15 minutes early, nervous in a way I hadn't been since my first day at the diner. I'd worn my best clothes, which wasn't saying much, and tried to look professional, whatever that meant for a 20-year-old who'd been homeless 6 months earlier. Linda walked in right on time, and I recognized her immediately from her profile picture. She was tall, mid-60s, with steel gray hair cut in a sharp bob, and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She wore a burgundy coat that looked expensive, and carried herself with the kind of confidence I'd only ever seen in people who'd never been told they were average. But when she saw me, she stopped dead. Her face went completely white. "Are you okay?" I asked, standing up awkwardly. She didn't answer for a moment. She just stared at me, her eyes moving across my face like she was seeing a ghost. Then she seemed to shake herself and smiled, but it looked forced. "I'm sorry. You look like someone I used to know. Please sit." We ordered coffee and talked about the hotel project, about potential future orders, about my process and materials. She asked intelligent questions about my business model, gently pointing out places where I could improve my pricing or expand my product line. But the whole time, she kept studying my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Finally, after about 30 minutes, she set down her coffee cup and said, "Melissa Harper. Your full name is Melissa Rose Harper." It wasn't a question. I nodded slowly, wondering how she knew my middle name. "And your mother's maiden name was Ross. Eleanor Ross was your grandmother." My heart started pounding. "How do you know that?" Linda's eyes filled with tears. She reached across the table and took my hand. "Because Eleanor was my sister. I'm your great-aunt Melissa. I've been looking for you for 20 years. The cafe seemed to tilt around me. I pulled my hand back, confused and suddenly frightened. "That's not possible. My father said we didn't have family on my mother's side." "Your father cut us off," Linda said, her voice tight with old anger. "He banned me from your family when you were 2 years old. Threatened legal action if I ever tried to contact you or your mother again." "Why would he do that?" Linda looked down at her coffee, composing herself. When she looked back up, her eyes were fierce. "Because I tried to help your mother leave him. Your grandmother saw through your father the moment they met. She knew he was controlling, manipulative. She opposed the marriage from the beginning, tried to talk your mother out of it. And she was right. Within a year of the wedding, he'd isolated your mother, completely controlled every dollar, monitored every phone call. I sat frozen, listening to my childhood being reframed through someone else's eyes. When you were born, Eleanor was overjoyed, Linda continued. You were her first grandchild. She loved you so much, Melissa. You looked just like her, same eyes, same determined little chin. But your father hated that. He hated that you reminded everyone of the woman who'd seen exactly what he was. She died when I was 2, I whispered. My mother told me that once. She did. Heart attack, sudden and devastating. Your mother wanted to bring you to the funeral, but your father forbade it. Said if she went, he'd change the locks and she'd never see her children again. So she stayed home and I buried my sister alone. Linda's voice cracked. After Eleanor died, I tried to stay in your lives. I called, sent letters, showed up at the house. Your father threatened to get a restraining order, said I was harassing the family, trying to turn your mother against him. He was very convincing, very legal about it. So I backed off, but I never stopped looking. Looking for what? For you. I knew that someday you'd escape that house. Girls like us with Eleanor's blood, we don't stay caged forever. I watched online, searched social media, hoping you'd surface somewhere with your real name. And 2 months ago, I was browsing that craft marketplace for gifts, and I saw your listing. Melissa Harper. I clicked on your profile picture and I knew immediately. You look exactly like Eleanor did at your age. My hands were shaking. I set down my coffee cup before I spilled it. Why didn't you say something when you first contacted me? I had to be sure, Linda said gently. And I had to know you were safe, that you'd gotten away from him. When I saw the quality of your work, the intelligence in your descriptions, the fact that you were supporting yourself, I knew you'd made it out. Then I needed to meet you in person to see if you'd want to know the truth. Do I have other family? I asked, my voice barely audible. You have me, Linda said firmly. And you have Eleanor's legacy, even if your father tried to erase it. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet pouch. This belonged to your grandmother. She wore it every day until she died. I've kept it safe, waiting for the day I could give it to you. She placed the pouch in my hand. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a small oval locket. I opened it with trembling fingers. On one side was a tiny photograph of a woman who looked so much like my reflection that I gasped. On the other side, engraved in tiny script, were words I could barely read through my tears. You are stronger than they will ever know. She had that made a month before she died, Linda said quietly. She knew your father would try to break you and your mother. This was her message passed down. You are stronger than they will ever know. I couldn't speak. I just held the necklace and cried while this woman I'd just met, this family I didn't know I had, sat with me in patient silence. Finally, Linda said, I want to help you, Melissa. Not because you're a good investment or because I pity you, but because you're Eleanor's granddaughter and you deserve the chance your mother never got. I ran a successful business for 40 years. I know things that could help you. Let me mentor you. No charge, no strings, just family helping family. I looked up at her through tears. Why would you do that for me? Because Eleanor would have done it if she'd lived, Linda said simply. Because your mother couldn't. And because I've watched my sister's legacy get buried for too long. You're bringing it back to life with every piece you create. For the first time in my life, I had family who chose me. Not because they had to, not out of obligation, but because they wanted to. Because they saw value in me that had nothing to do with service or silence. I put on the necklace right there in the cafe, feeling the cool silver against my skin. Linda smiled, her eyes warm with something I'd never seen directed at me before: unconditional acceptance. And the necklace held one more secret I wouldn't discover until years later. Linda became the teacher I'd never had, and I became the student I'd always wanted to be. We met twice a week at first, usually over breakfast at that same cafe, and she taught me everything she'd learned from 40 years of running her own interior design and furniture business. But she didn't teach like my father had conditioned me to expect, with criticism and contempt for every mistake. She taught by sharing her own failures, first making it safe to ask questions, to not know, to learn without shame. Financial management isn't about complex formulas, she said one morning, spreading out spreadsheet templates on the table between our coffee cups. It's about knowing exactly where every dollar comes from and goes to. You need to track material costs, labor hours, overhead, profit margins. Not because some business book says so, but because knowledge is power. The moment you understand your numbers, no one can take advantage of you. I soaked it up like someone who'd been dying of thirst. I learned how to read a profit and loss statement, how to calculate my true hourly rate, how to set aside money for taxes before I was tempted to spend it. Linda showed me her old business records, pointing out mistakes she'd made in her 20s, underpricing her work, accepting clients who didn't respect her, saying yes to projects that drained her without adequate compensation. Women especially are taught to undervalue ourselves, she said, to be grateful for opportunities, to not ask for too much, to make ourselves smaller so others feel bigger. Your father weaponized that conditioning, but you're going to unlearn it starting now. She taught me negotiation tactics that felt revolutionary, how to name my price confidently and then stay silent, letting the customer fill the space, how to recognize when someone was trying to manipulate me into a discount by making me feel guilty or inexperienced, how to walk away from bad deals without apologizing or explaining. Your work has value, Linda repeated constantly. You don't need to justify your prices or defend your worth. State it clearly and let people decide if they're a match for what you offer. The right customers will pay gladly. The wrong ones will complain no matter how low you go. But the most important lesson wasn't about money or business mechanics. It was about identity. You need to build a brand, Linda explained, not just a product line, but a story people want to be part of. What makes your work different? Why should someone buy from you instead of a furniture store? You need to answer that clearly. Together, we developed the story of my company, handcrafted pieces made from reclaimed and rescued materials, each one unique, each one a small act of transformation, taking what was broken or discarded and making it beautiful again. I didn't tell customers about my childhood, but the metaphor was there in every piece I made. Linda loaned me $5,000 to register my first LLC, get proper business insurance, upgrade my tools, and rent a small workshop space. I insisted on a written loan agreement with interest. She tried to refuse the interest, but I was firm. If I'm going to build something real, I need to do it right, I told her. No shortcuts, no charity. You're teaching me to value my work. That means I value your investment too. She smiled and signed the agreement. Harper Handcrafted launched 6 months after Linda and I first met. The company was small, just me working out of a 200-square-foot workshop in a converted garage creating custom furniture and decorative pieces. But everything about it was intentional: professional product photography, a clean, elegant website, clear pricing, detailed descriptions that told the story of each piece, customer service that treated every inquiry with respect, whether someone was buying a $40 box or a $400 cabinet. Orders grew steadily. I developed a reputation for quality and reliability. Customers started leaving reviews that made me cry, not because they praised the products, but because they saw me. The artist clearly cares about every detail. This isn't mass-produced junk. This is made with love and skill. I can feel the care in every inch of this piece. I was building something real, something that existed independent of anyone's opinion of me, something untouchable. 8 months into running the company, I realized I needed help. I couldn't keep up with orders and administrative work alone. Linda suggested I hire someone part-time. I posted a listing for an assistant 10 hours a week, helping with finishing work, packaging, and inventory management. I received 23 applications. One caught my attention immediately. My name is Jean Mitchell. I'm 62 years old and was forced into early retirement last year when my company downsized. I have no furniture experience, but I'm a fast learner, detail-oriented, and I need work. I'm willing to start at whatever rate you think is fair. I just need a chance. I recognized the desperation in those words. I'd written similar sentences 2 years earlier. I hired her the next day. Jean became far more than an assistant. She was methodical and patient, qualities I'd lost in my constant hustle to prove myself. She asked questions about why I did things certain ways, which forced me to examine my processes and find better methods. She caught mistakes I would have missed in my exhaustion, and she talked to me like I was a person, not just a boss. "You're working yourself too hard," she said one afternoon, watching me sand a table at 7 p.m. when I'd been there since 6 a.m. "Success doesn't require burnout." "I'm fine," I said automatically. "No, you're not." She said it gently but firmly. "You're running scared. Like if you slow down for even a moment, it'll all disappear. But honey, you've built something solid here. You're allowed to rest sometimes." I stopped sanding and looked at her. "I don't know how to rest." "Then let me teach you," she said, "the way you're teaching me about furniture. Trade skills." Over the following months, Jean became my friend, and in many ways a second mother figure. Not like my own mother, who'd loved me, but couldn't protect me. Jean showed me what healthy relationships looked like: boundaries, mutual respect, the ability to disagree without cruelty. We worked side by side, talking about everything from politics to recipes to the grief of lost opportunities. She told me about her husband who died 5 years earlier, about her daughter who lived across the country and rarely called about the loneliness of being discarded by a corporate world that decided she'd outlived her usefulness. I told her things I'd never told anyone about my father's contempt, about sleeping on a laundromat bench, about the constant fear that I'd wake up one day and it would all be gone. "It won't be gone," Jean said, "because it's not built on luck or someone else's approval. It's built on your skill and your character. Those things don't disappear." Between Linda and Jean, I was building something I'd never had: family by choice. Women who valued me, taught me, believed in me. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. My company grew. Harper Handcrafted became known in certain circles for exceptional quality and artistry. I hired 2 more part-time craftspeople. I moved into a larger workshop. I paid off Linda's loan in 18 months instead of the agreed-upon 3 years. I was 23 years old and financially stable for the first time in my life. I had a savings account with actual money in it. I rented a real apartment with heat that worked and windows that let in light. I bought groceries without calculating every penny. I was becoming someone new, someone my father had tried to convince me I could never be. But success tends to draw eyes. Some watch with pride, others with hunger. I didn't think about my father's family much anymore. Not deliberately. I hadn't made some dramatic decision to forget them. They simply faded into the background of my life like a bad dream that loses its power in daylight. I was too busy building something real to waste energy on people who'd made it clear I had no value to them. But while I was growing, they were crumbling. I didn't learn the details until much later, but the timeline matters because it explains everything that came after. While I was transforming myself from a homeless teenager into a business owner, my father's carefully constructed world was falling apart. Evan, the golden child who could do no wrong, had become exactly what you'd expect from a man raised without consequences. He dropped out of community college after 1 semester, drifted through a series of jobs he was always fired from for poor attendance or attitude, and eventually stopped working legitimate jobs altogether. Instead, he discovered online gambling, and when that left him buried in debt, online scams. He started small, fake concert tickets, fraudulent product listings on marketplace sites. Then he graduated to more sophisticated operations, targeting elderly people with tech support scams and fake investment opportunities. He was good at it in the way that predators are good at identifying vulnerability. He learned to sound trustworthy, sympathetic, authoritative. He learned to pressure people into acting quickly before they could think clearly or consult family members. The money came in fast and left faster. Gambling sites, cryptocurrency schemes, attempts to appear successful with expensive clothes and a leased car he couldn't afford. He was a black hole of need and entitlement, convinced the world owed him the success that should have been his birthright. My father, meanwhile, was making his own mistakes with the confidence of someone who'd never been held accountable. He took early retirement at 60 with a modest pension and retirement savings, then proceeded to lose most of it in a series of reckless investments. Real estate schemes that promised guaranteed returns, penny stocks his buddy from the bar recommended, a multi-level marketing venture that required a $30,000 initial investment. He never researched anything properly because he was too arrogant to believe he could be fooled. He'd spent his entire life controlling smaller people, especially women, and that had given him an inflated sense of his own intelligence. If someone challenged his decisions, he'd shut them down with rage. If my mother questioned a financial choice, he'd remind her she knew nothing about money and should be grateful he managed everything. The pension covered their basic bills, but the savings were disappearing fast. The house needed repairs they couldn't afford. The car was dying. Their credit cards were maxing out. My father started asking Evan for money, not knowing or not wanting to know where Evan's occasional cash windfalls came from. My mother watched it all happen with the helpless terror of someone trapped in a sinking ship. She was 54 years old, had never held a job outside the home, had no credit in her own name, no savings, no skills the modern job market valued. She'd built her entire adult life around managing my father's moods and maintaining the appearance of a functional family, and now even that illusion was crumbling. She tried in small, desperate ways to reach back toward the people she'd lost. She found an old friend on social media and sent a tentative message. "I know it's been years, but I was thinking about you and wondered how you're doing." The friend responded politely but distantly. Too much time had passed. Too many canceled plans and ignored calls when my father had isolated her. The bridge had burned too completely to rebuild with a Facebook message. She tried calling a cousin she'd been close to before marriage. The cousin was kind but busy, and the conversation felt stilted, full of awkward silences where shared history should have been. My mother hung up feeling more alone than before she'd dialed. She was trapped, too old to start over, too beaten down to fight, too financially dependent to leave. She'd made her choices decades ago, and now she was living with the consequences while watching everything fall apart around her. And then Evan made a discovery that changed everything. He was scrolling through local news on his phone one afternoon, probably avoiding job listings, when he saw a headline, "Rising Entrepreneurs Under 30 Local Success Stories." The article featured 5 young business owners in the region who'd built successful companies from scratch. Third on the list was me. There was a photo professional headshot I'd had taken for the website, a brief bio describing Harper. Handcrafted my specialty in custom furniture, and decorative pieces my commitment to sustainable materials and traditional craftsmanship. The article mentioned that my company had grown significantly in recent years, serving high-end clients and boutique hotels across the Northeast. Evan stared at the photo I later learned for several minutes. Then he showed it to our father. "Look at this," he said. "Melissa. She's got a company. Sounds like she's doing pretty well." My father read the article 3 times. I can imagine his face, the shock, the rage, the wounded pride. The daughter he'd thrown away, the girl he'd told wasn't worth investing in, had built something successful. Without him. Without his permission. Without his control. But more importantly to him, without sharing. "She owes us," he said finally. Evan told me this later during one of his desperate phone calls. "We raised her, fed her, put a roof over her head for 18 years. She wouldn't exist without us, and now she's out there building a life like she doesn't owe us anything." Evan, drowning in debt and desperate for a solution that didn't involve actual work or accountability, agreed immediately. "Maybe she'd help us out. I mean, we're family." But my father didn't just call. He wasn't going to ask his daughter for help like an equal. Instead, he did what controlling men do when they sense an opportunity. He hired someone to gather intelligence. The private investigator worked for 3 months compiling everything he could find from public records, business filings, property records, and industry databases. He tracked the growth of Harper Handcrafted, estimated the value of my inventory and equipment, found records of major contracts and purchases. He built a comprehensive picture of my financial life. The final report estimated my net worth at approximately $13.6 million. I was 28 years old, had been on my own for 10 years, and had built a multi-million-dollar company from absolutely nothing. I owned my workshop outright, had substantial savings and investments, held contracts with major clients, and had equity in the business itself. My father read that report in his falling-apart house with his failing retirement accounts and his criminal son, and made a decision. He would get what he believed he was owed. He planned it carefully, more carefully than he'd planned anything in years. He chose Christmas as the backdrop, knowing the holiday carried emotional weight. He invited extended family to create an audience. He hired a lawyer to prepare documents. He rehearsed his speeches about family obligation and parental sacrifice. And then, after 10 years of silence, they called. The call came on a Tuesday evening in early December. I was in my workshop finishing a custom cabinet for a client in Boston when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. I'd learned to be protective of my time and energy, but something made me pick up. Melissa. The voice was so familiar and so foreign at the same time that it took me a moment to place it. It's Mom. I set down my sanding block, my heart suddenly pounding. Mom. Yes, honey, it's me. Her voice shook, each word trembling, like she was reading from a script she'd been forced to memorize. I know it's been a long time, 10 years. We've been thinking about you, missing you. We landed like a stone in my chest. I walked away from my workbench, needing distance from the tools in my hands in case my shaking fingers dropped them. Why are you calling? It's almost Christmas, she said, and I could hear the desperate brightness she was forcing into her tone. We thought your father thought it would be nice to have the family together again, to talk, to make things right. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Make things right. As if 10 years of silence could be repaired with a holiday dinner and some rehearsed apologies. As if being thrown out of my home at 18 was something that could be made right with a phone call. Melissa, her voice cracked. Are you still there? I'm here. Your father wants to talk to you. He's changed, honey. He's had a lot of time to think, and he wants to apologize. He wants to see you. We both do. We want you to come home for Christmas. Home. The word felt like a lie. That place had never been home. It had been a prison I'd escaped. In the background, I heard a muffled male voice, sharp and impatient. My father coaching her, telling her what to say next. She'd paused too long, deviated from the script. Just a few hours, my mother continued quickly, the words tumbling out faster now. Just Christmas dinner with the family. Some relatives will be there too, Aunt Carol, Uncle Jim. Just family. We want to see how you're doing, hear about your life. Please, Melissa, it would mean so much to us, to me. Every instinct I'd developed over 10 years of protecting myself screamed danger. This wasn't reconciliation. This was something else. Something calculated. My father didn't change. Men like him didn't wake up one day filled with remorse and humility. They doubled down. They found new ways to control. But underneath the alarm bells, underneath the hard-won wisdom, there was still a small voice. The voice of the 8-year-old girl scrubbing floors and hoping her father would notice. The voice of the teenager who'd brought home straight A's and waited for praise that never came. That voice whispered, what if he really has changed? What if he finally sees you? What if this is your chance to finally hear the words you've needed your whole life? I don't know, I said slowly. Please. My mother's voice broke completely. Please, Melissa. I need to see you. I need to know you're okay. She stopped, and I heard her breath hitch. Whatever she'd been about to say, she'd caught herself. Just consider it. That's all I'm asking. After we hung up, I sat in my workshop for an hour staring at nothing. The cabinet sat half-finished the December cold, seeping through the walls despite the space heater running in the corner. My phone felt heavy in my hand, like it carried more than just the memory of a conversation. I called Linda. She listened without interrupting as I recounted the entire conversation, including the muffled voice in the background and the trembling quality of my mother's words. When I finished, there was a long silence. What do you think I should do? I asked finally. That's not my decision to make, Linda said carefully, but I'll tell you what I think. People who genuinely need forgiveness ask for it privately. They call themselves, they speak from the heart. They don't have. Their wife make the call while they coach from the background. People who want something from you do it with an audience, with pressure, with manipulation, disguised as reconciliation. You think it's a trap. I think your father has never done anything in his life that wasn't calculated to benefit himself. Her voice was gentle but firm. But I also understand the pull The part of you that still wants to believe he could be different, that he could see you the way you deserve to be seen all along. That's not weakness, Melissa. That's human. That's the wounded child in all of us who never stops hoping our parents will finally love us right. I pressed my palm against my eyes, fighting back tears. So what do I do with that? You acknowledge it, but you don't let it make decisions for you. She paused. If you want closure, if you need to look him in the eye one more time and see for yourself what this is about, then go. But go with your eyes open. Go protected. Go knowing that you owe them nothing, and you're walking in there as the woman you've become, not the girl they discarded. I don't know if I'm strong enough for that. Melissa! Linda's voice was fierce now. You survived being thrown out at 18 with nothing. You built a multi-million-dollar company from a basement room and pure determination. You are one of the strongest people I've ever met. The question isn't whether you're strong enough. The question is whether engaging with them serves you at all, or whether it's just reopening old wounds. We talked for another hour. Linda made me promise that if I decided to go, I'd meet with my attorney first and make sure there were no legal vulnerabilities they could exploit. She offered to come with me, but I knew I needed to do this alone if I did it at all. After we hung up, I sat with the decision for 3 days. I went through every rational argument against going. I listed all the ways this could be a manipulation. I reminded myself that I owed them nothing, that I'd built a beautiful life without them and didn't need their validation. But in the end, the wounded child won. I wanted closure. I wanted to look my father in the eye as an adult, as someone successful and valuable, and see if he could acknowledge what he'd done. I wanted to believe, despite everything, that people could change, that maybe, just maybe, he'd spent 10 years thinking about the daughter he'd thrown away and realized he'd been wrong. I called my mother back and said I'd come. The relief in her voice should have been my warning. It was too intense, too immediate, like I'd just solved a desperate problem rather than agreed to a simple family dinner. I had no idea I was walking into a perfectly laid trap. I drove to my childhood home on Christmas Eve, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. The road was muscle memory. I could have driven it blindfolded, but everything looked different through adult eyes. The neighborhood seemed smaller, shabbier. The streets I'd once thought were long felt short and cramped. When I turned onto Maple Street, my chest tightened. The house looked like it was dying slowly. The white paint had yellowed and peeled in patches, exposing gray wood underneath. The front yard, once rigidly maintained by my weekend labor, had gone wild with weeds choking the flower beds. One shutter hung crooked. The porch sagged slightly on one side. It looked like what it was, a place where people had stopped caring, stopped trying, stopped maintaining the illusion of perfection. I'd driven here in my 3-year-old SUV, nothing extravagant but reliable and paid for in full. I parked in the driveway behind a rusted sedan I didn't recognize and sat for a moment gathering myself. This house had once felt enormous, oppressive, inescapable. Now it just looked sad and small. I got out of the car and walked to the front door. Before I could knock, it opened. My mother stood there, and for a moment we just stared at each other. She'd aged dramatically, new lines around her eyes and mouth, gray threading through her hair, a thinness that suggested stress rather than health. But her eyes were the same tired, apologetic, defeated. "Melissa," she breathed and pulled me into a quick, stiff hug. Her arms felt fragile. She pulled back almost immediately, her eyes darting past me toward the interior of the house, checking to see if he was watching. Come in, everyone's here." The inside smelled exactly as I remembered, the same detergent, the same air freshener failing to mask the underlying scent of old carpet and closed windows. The furniture was the same, just more worn, the walls still bare except for that single family portrait, but the atmosphere was identical to what I'd left cold, controlled, unwelcoming. My father stood in the living room doorway. He'd aged 2 grayer thicker around the middle face, more lined, but his eyes held the same flat, assessing coldness I remembered. He looked at me the way you'd look at a piece of furniture you were considering buying, evaluating value and utility. "Melissa," he said. Not hello, not welcome home, just my name stated like a fact. He didn't move to hug me, didn't smile, just nodded once, a minimal acknowledgement of my existence. "Dad," I said, matching his tone. Movement behind him drew my attention. Evan emerged from the kitchen holding a beer, and I barely recognized him. He'd always been stocky, but now he looked gaunt and unhealthy. His skin had a grayish pallor, his eyes sunken, his clothes hanging loose like he'd recently lost weight the hard way. He looked older than 30, older than me despite being 2 years younger. But what struck me most was his expression as his gaze moved past me to the driveway landing on my SUV. His face twisted with something ugly envy, mixed with bitterness, mixed with rage. The look of someone who believed he deserved what someone else had earned. "Nice car," he said, and it sounded like an accusation. "Must be doing pretty well for yourself." "I work hard," I said evenly. He snorted. "Yeah, I'm sure that's all it is. Hard work." The sarcasm was thick, nasty. "Some of us work hard too, and don't end up with new cars and fancy businesses." "Evan," my mother said quietly, a warning. He ignored her, moving closer to me. He smelled like beer and cigarettes, and something sour underneath. "What is it you do again?" "Make little boxes and furniture, playing arts and crafts while the rest of us live in the real world." I recognized the tactic diminish my success, reframe it as luck or frivolity rather than skill. Make me defend myself. Put me on the back foot. I'd seen this move 1,000 times from my father. Evan had learned from the master. "I run a manufacturing company," I said calmly. "Custom furniture and design work. We serve clients across 6 states. "We," he mocked. "Listen to you. We. Like you're running General Motors." "Evan, that's enough." My father's voice cut through the room sharp and controlled. Not defending me, just maintaining order in his domain. "We have guests. Behave yourself." Guests. My stomach dropped. I'd assumed it would just be immediate family, maybe an aunt and uncle. But as we moved toward the dining room, I saw the table had been set for at least 12 people. Extended family I barely knew had already arrived. My father's sister Carol and her husband Jim, some cousins, an elderly neighbor. They all looked at me with open curiosity, whispering to each other. And then I saw him. Sitting in the corner of the living room, away from the main group, was a man I didn't recognize. Mid-50s, wearing a suit that looked too formal for a family Christmas dinner. He had a leather briefcase on the floor beside his chair and was reviewing papers with the focused attention of someone working rather than celebrating. "Who's that?" I asked my mother quietly. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Oh, that's Mr. Mitchell, your father's attorney. He's just here to help with some year-end paperwork, tax things, nothing to worry about." Every alarm bell in my system went off at once. A lawyer. At Christmas dinner, with paperwork. I turned to look at my father, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something that looked almost like anticipation, like he was waiting for a show to start. "Why is your attorney here?" I asked directly. "Like your mother said," he replied smoothly. "Year-end business, nothing that concerns you. Come, let's eat. Everyone's waiting." I should have left right then. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, walk out the door, drive away, and never look back. But I was surrounded by family, by people watching, and some old conditioning kicked in. The rule that you don't make scenes, don't embarrass the family, don't question the patriarch's decisions in front of others. So I sat down at the table. My mother had made all my old childhood favorites: honey ham, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole. The food I'd cooked 1,000 times under her anxious supervision. It should have felt nostalgic, but instead it felt like theater, like props in a play I didn't know I was performing in. The dinner conversation was stilted and strange. Relatives asked me polite questions about my business, my life where I live now. I answered vaguely, keeping details minimal. My father said nothing, just watched me while pretending to eat. Evan drank steadily, his bitterness radiating across the table. Mr. Mitchell, the attorney, remained in the living room, occasionally glancing at his watch. The whole thing felt wrong, orchestrated, dangerous. And then my father stood up and tapped his glass. The sound of glass against metal cut through the low dinner conversation. My father stood at the head of the table, wine glass in one hand, the other raised for attention. Everyone fell silent, immediately conditioned by years of obeying the patriarch. "I'd like to say a few words," he began, his voice carrying that smooth, controlled tone I remembered so well. "It's wonderful to have the family together, especially to have Melissa back with us after so many years apart." Apart. As if I'd gone on vacation rather than been thrown out with garbage bags. "We've missed you, Melissa." He continued, looking directly at me with something that might have looked like warmth to people who didn't know him. "And we've been keeping track of how well you're doing. We're very proud." Proud. The word felt obscene coming from his mouth. "In fact," he said, his smile widening, "our Melissa has done remarkably well for herself. She's built quite an impressive business." He paused, letting the anticipation build. "According to what I've learned, she's worth over $13 million. The room exploded. Gasps, chairs scraping, whispered exclamations of shock, and I could see it rippling across faces. Immediate calculation. Aunt Carol's eyes went wide. Cousin David leaned forward suddenly, very interested. The elderly neighbor clutched her napkin. My mother's face went white as paper. Only Evan didn't look surprised. He looked vindicated, like this confirmed something he'd been arguing. $13 million, my father repeated, savoring the words. From nothing, from the education and foundation we provided, from the values we instilled. My hands hidden under the table clenched into fists. He was rewriting history in real time in front of witnesses, the education he'd refused to support, the foundation of being thrown out at 18, the values of contempt and cruelty. That's incredible, Melissa," Aunt Carol stammered. $13 million, from making furniture, custom design and manufacturing," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "Yes. Now I know this might seem unusual," my father continued, gesturing toward Mr. Mitchell, who stood and walked to the table with his briefcase. "But we thought Christmas would be a good time to discuss something as a family, something that affects all of us." Mr. Mitchell placed his briefcase on the table and opened it with practiced precision. He pulled out a stack of documents, each page flagged with colored tabs, indicating where signatures were required. "Miss Harper," he said, his voice professionally neutral, "your father has asked me to prepare what we call a voluntary family financial assistance agreement. It's a fairly standard document that many successful family members use to help support their relatives." He slid the papers toward me. I didn't touch them. "The agreement outlines a transfer of funds, in this case $6 million, into a family trust that would be managed by your father for the benefit of all family members. This would help ensure equitable distribution of the blessings you've been fortunate enough to receive." Blessings. As if my success had fallen from the sky rather than been built from years of exhaustion and determination. "It's entirely voluntary, of course, Mr. Mitchell continued, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But your father feels, and I agree from a legal perspective, that you have a moral obligation to help support the family that raised you and made your success possible." The room was completely silent. Everyone watched me waiting. I looked at the papers, then at Mr. Mitchell, then at my father. The pieces clicked into place with crystalline clarity. The private investigator, the 3 months of planning, the lawyer with carefully prepared documents, the audience of family members to create social pressure. This wasn't a reconciliation. This was a shakedown carefully orchestrated to maximize my compliance and minimize my ability to refuse. I looked directly at Mr. Mitchell and asked calmly, "Are you aware you're witnessing an attempted coercion?" His face went pale. This is a voluntary... Is it... I interrupted, my voice still quiet but sharp. "Because it seems like you've prepared legal documents, assembled an audience, and are now pressuring me to sign away $6 million at a family dinner where I was invited under false pretenses. Does that sound voluntary to you, counselor?" "Melissa." My father's voice cut in warning in every syllable. I turned to look at him. "You told Mom you wanted to apologize, to make things right. That was a lie, wasn't it? This was always about money." His mask slipped. Just for a second, I saw the rage underneath raw and vicious. Then he controlled it, smoothed his expression, but his voice came out harder. "After everything we did for you," he said, volume rising. "After we fed you clothed, you kept a roof over your head for 18 years. You don't think you owe this family anything. You threw me out when I was 18. I said, my voice still calm. With 2 garbage bags and $300. You refused to sign my financial aid forms. You told me I wasn't worth the investment. We gave you life," he shouted, losing control now. "We raised you. Every bite of food you ate, every piece of clothing on your back, every lesson you learned, that was us. We made you who you are." "No," I said quietly. "You didn't. I made myself who I am despite you, not because of you." He slammed his hand on the table, making dishes jump and wine slosh in glasses. "You selfish ungrateful, you owe this family. You owe us for 18 years of sacrifice." "What sacrifice?" My voice was rising now, too. 10 years of suppressed rage finally finding its outlet. The sacrifice of giving me chores while Evan watched TV. The sacrifice of ignoring every achievement while celebrating his mediocrity. The sacrifice of making me feel worthless every single day of my childhood. "You watch your mouth in my house," he snarled. "This isn't my house," I said, standing up. "It never was, and I don't owe you anything." The family sat frozen eyes darting between us like spectators at a tennis match. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked excited by the drama. None of them spoke up to defend me. None of them questioned what was happening. My father's face had gone red veins standing out on his forehead. "You think you can just walk away, come into my home, eat my food, and refuse to help your family? I came here because Mom said you wanted to apologize," I said. "But this was always a trap, wasn't it? You hired a private investigator. You planned this ambush. You invited an audience to pressure me into signing your documents." Mr. Mitchell was quietly gathering his papers, clearly realizing he'd been brought into something uglier than a simple family financial discussion. My father stepped closer to me, his voice dropping to something cold and dangerous. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign those papers. You're going to do your duty to this family. But then came the ultimatum. Or you can do the right thing and remember where you came from." My father finished, his voice dropping to that cold, controlled tone that used to terrify me as a child. "You owe this family half of what you have, $6.8 million, payment for 18 years of food shelter and raising you into who you are today." The number hung in the air like poison gas. "Payment," I repeated slowly. "You want me to pay you for being a parent?" "We invested in you," he said, and I could see he genuinely believed this. His face held absolute conviction. "Do you have any idea what it costs to raise a child? The food, the clothes, the roof over your head? We gave you everything, and now that you've made something of yourself, you think you can just forget about the people who made it possible." I almost laughed at the audacity. "You threw me out with nothing. You refused to help me go to college. You told me I wasn't worth the investment. And look how well you did without us coddling you," he said as if that proved his point. "We taught you to be independent, to work hard. Those are our values, our lessons. We made you tough. We made you successful. And now it's time to pay back what you owe." The logic was so twisted, so delusional, that I didn't know how to respond. In his mind, cruelty was a gift. Abandonment was a lesson. He'd rewritten the entire history of my childhood to cast himself as the architect of my success rather than the obstacle I'd overcome. "You don't actually believe that," I said quietly. "I believe in family responsibility," he snapped. "I believe in honoring your parents. I believe that when one member of a family succeeds, they have an obligation to lift up the others. That's what family means." "Then why didn't you lift me up when I needed it?" The question came out harder than I intended. "Why didn't you sign my financial aid forms? Why didn't you help me when I was 18 and desperate? Because you needed to learn—" "No," I interrupted. "You need to stop lying. At least be honest about what this is. You don't want to teach me anything. You want my money because you lost yours, because Evan can't support himself, and you can't bail him out anymore. This isn't about family values, it's about greed." Evan, who'd been watching from the sidelines with his beer, suddenly spoke up. "You know what, Melissa? You're right. Let's be honest." He stood up, weaving slightly clearly, several drinks past sober. "I need help. I need a fresh start. And yeah, maybe I made some mistakes, but you're my sister. You're supposed to help me." "Help you how?" I asked. "Buy me a house," he said, like it was the most reasonable request in the world. "Nothing crazy, just a small place, maybe 400,000. Somewhere I can live, start over, get my life together." "You've got 13 million. What's 400,000 to you?" I stared at him in disbelief. "You threw me under the bus when I was 18. You lied to Dad about me stealing from his wallet so he'd kick me out. You destroyed any chance I had at getting help for college." "That was 10 years ago," he said dismissively. "You need to let it go. Besides, it all worked out for you, didn't it? You're rich now. I'm the one who's struggling. I'm the one who needs help. And you're sitting on millions while your own brother is barely getting by. You're barely getting by because you gamble and scam people," I said. His face darkened. "You don't know anything about my life. I know you're asking me for $400,000 like I owe it to you, like my success is somehow your entitlement. You're my sister," he shouted. "Family helps family. Or did you forget what that means, living your fancy life with your fancy car and your fancy business?" "Evan," my mother said weakly, but no one paid attention to her. "She's forgotten everything," my father said, taking control of the room again. His voice was quieter now, more dangerous. "She's forgotten who raised her, who sacrificed for her, who gave her the foundation she built her entire life on. She's become selfish, greedy, ungrateful." He looked around the table at the assembled relatives, making sure everyone was watching, everyone was listening. This was his moment, his power play, and he was going to make it count. "So here's what's going to happen," he said, his eyes locked on mine. "You're going to sign those papers. You're going to transfer $6 million to this family, your family, to help the people who helped you. And Evan gets his house because that's what siblings do for each other." "And if I don't," I asked, though I already knew. "If you walk away from this table without helping your family," he said slowly, savoring each word, "then you're no longer our daughter. You'll leave this house, and you'll leave this family forever. No contact, no relationship. You'll be dead to us just like you've acted like we're dead to you for the past 10 years. The room was completely silent. Every eye was on me. I could feel the weight of their judgment, their expectations, the social pressure bearing down like a physical force. He'd engineered this, perfectly surrounded me with witnesses, created a scenario where refusing made me the villain, turned my success into a weapon against me. In his mind, I would break. I would sign the papers, because women are taught to smooth things over, to sacrifice for family peace, to put others first. Because daughters are supposed to honor their fathers, no matter what. Because the alternative, being publicly disowned, being branded as selfish and ungrateful, would be too socially unbearable. He believed he'd won. I looked at my mother, who sat frozen with her hands twisted in her lap, unable or unwilling to defend me. I looked at Evan, who watched me with entitled expectation, already spending my money in his mind. I looked at the relatives who waited for the drama to resolve, unconcerned with justice or truth, just hungry for the spectacle. And I looked at my father, this man who'd spent my entire childhood trying to convince me I was worthless, who'd thrown me out with nothing, who now wanted to harvest the fruits of labor he'd tried to prevent me from planting. I thought about Linda's words, "People who need forgiveness ask for it privately. People who want something from you do it with an audience." I thought about 18-year-old me standing in the cold with 2 garbage bags, taking that first breath of freedom. I thought about the woman I'd become, the business owner, the employer, the success story he wanted to claim credit for, and I made my choice. So I stood up and chose myself. "I'm not signing anything," I said, my voice steady and clear, "and I'm leaving." I pushed my chair back and stood. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the silent room. "Sit down," my father commanded. "We're not finished discussing this." "Yes," I said, meeting his eyes. "We are." I walked past him toward the living room where I'd left my coat and purse. Behind me, I heard chairs scraping, voices rising in confusion and protest. My father's voice cut through them all. "If you walk out that door, you're making a choice you can't take back." I kept walking. I grabbed my coat from the rack and my purse from the chair. My hands were steady, my breathing calm. 10 years ago, this moment would have destroyed me. 10 years ago, the threat of being disowned would have felt like death. But I'd already survived being thrown away by this family. I'd already built a life without them. They had no power left to take. "I need some air," I said, not to anyone in particular, and walked through the kitchen toward the back door. The December night hit me like a wall of ice. The backyard was dark except for the glow from the kitchen window and a distant streetlight. I could see my breath in white clouds. I walked far enough from the house that I couldn't be easily overheard, pulled out my phone, and called Harrison. He answered on the second ring. "Melissa, it's late. Everything okay?" "No," I said quietly. "I need you to open the 2006 file." There was a pause. Harrison had been my attorney for 6 years, had worked on everything from business incorporation to contract reviews to intellectual property protection. When I'd first hired him, I'd given him a sealed file with specific instructions. Keep it locked, don't open it unless I specifically asked, and don't ask questions about what was in it. He'd honored that agreement without hesitation. "The 2006 file," he repeated carefully. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. I need everything you can pull together by tomorrow morning. Every document, every piece of evidence, everything we discussed when I first gave you that file." "What happened?" "My father happened," I said. "Exactly the way we thought he might if he ever found out I was successful." Harrison's voice shifted from professional to protective. "Where are you right now?" "Standing in my childhood backyard. They ambushed me at Christmas dinner. Had a lawyer here with papers already drawn up demanding $6 million. Made it a public spectacle in front of the whole family." "Jesus," he breathed. "Okay, listen to me carefully. Don't sign anything. Don't make any verbal agreements. Don't let them record you saying anything that could be construed as a promise, and get out of there as soon as you can safely do so." "Already planning on it. I'll have everything ready by morning," he said. "Full documentation, legal options, everything. We've been preparing for this possibility for years. If he wants to play games, we'll show him what real legal consequences look like." "Thank you, Harrison." "Melissa." His voice was gentle now. "I'm sorry it came to this. I know part of you was hoping." "I know," I interrupted quietly. "But hope doesn't change who people are. I'll call you tomorrow." I hung up and stood for a moment in the freezing night, letting the cold clear my head. Power was flowing back into my hands with each breath. They'd tried to trap me, but they'd forgotten something crucial. I wasn't the helpless 18-year-old they'd discarded. I was the woman who'd survived their worst and built something they could never touch. I turned back towards the house to get my coat from inside, and that's when I saw him. Evan stood by the back door, half hidden in shadows, a cigarette glowing orange in his hand. His face was visible in the light spilling from the kitchen window, and it was completely drained of color. Our eyes met, and I knew immediately that he'd heard enough. He'd heard me say 2006 file. He'd heard me say legal consequences. He'd heard me mention documentation and evidence. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then he dropped his cigarette, crushed it under his shoe, and stumbled back inside. I heard his voice urgent and panicked, even through the closed door. Dad, we have a problem. She's calling a lawyer. She has something, some file from 2006. She knows something." I could have stayed outside, waited for them to panic, let them stew in their fear. But I was done hiding, done sneaking around, done being afraid of their reactions. I walked back inside. The kitchen was empty, but I could hear urgent voices in the dining room. I walked through calmly, not rushing, not sneaking. I collected my coat from the rack and my purse from where I'd set it down earlier. When I turned around, they were all there, my father Evan, my mother, even some of the relatives who'd wandered in from the dining room drawn by the commotion. They formed a wall between me and the front door, but it wasn't a physical barrier. It was just people diminished and desperate. My father tried one more time to assert dominance. "Sit down, Melissa. We're not finished here. We need to talk about this like adults." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw him clearly for the first time in my life. Not the towering authority figure from my childhood, not the man whose approval I'd once desperately craved. Just a man. An aging, financially desperate man who'd built his sense of worth on controlling smaller people, and who now faced the reality that one of those people had grown beyond his reach. "Yes, we are finished," I said quietly. "We've been finished for 10 years. I just didn't realize it until tonight." "You can't just walk away," he said. But there was something in his voice now, uncertainty creeping in around the edges of his command. "Watch me." I moved toward the door. No one physically tried to stop me, though my father's voice followed. "If you leave now, that's it. You're not welcome back. You're not our daughter anymore. You're nothing to this family." I stopped at the door and turned back one more time. I was never anything to this family except free labor and a scapegoat. You made sure I knew that every single day of my childhood. The difference is, I don't need you to tell me what I am anymore. I know what I am. I built it myself without you, despite you. My mother made a small sound, not quite a word, just a whimper of distress. I looked at her, this woman who'd been too trapped to protect me, and felt something complicated, pity mixed with grief, mixed with the final severing of hope. "Goodbye," I said. I walked out the front door into the freezing Christmas Eve night, got in my SUV, and drove away from that house for what I knew would be the last time. My hands didn't shake. My breathing stayed even. I felt strangely calm, like I'd just set down a heavy weight I'd been carrying for 30 years. I drove to a hotel downtown, checked in, turned my phone on silent, and slept more peacefully than I had in months. And by morning my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The hotel room was generic and impersonal, beige walls, corporate landscape art, the faint chemical smell of industrial cleaning products. But it had a lock that only I controlled, heat that worked, and a bed with clean sheets. After the suffocating atmosphere of my childhood home, it felt like sanctuary. I turned off my phone's ringer, completely set it face down on the nightstand, and went into the bathroom. The shower was scalding hot, and I stood under the spray until the water started running cool, washing away the tension of the evening. When I finally emerged, wrapped in the hotel's scratchy white robe, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. I crawled into bed at 11 p.m. on Christmas Eve and fell asleep almost immediately. No nightmares came. No anxiety dreams where I was back in that house, small and powerless. No racing thoughts about what I should have said or could have done differently. I slept deeply and dreamlessly, the kind of sleep that only comes when you finally stopped fighting something and accepted the truth of it. When I woke, sunlight was streaming through the gap in the curtains. I checked the clock, 10:15 in the morning. I'd slept for 11 hours straight. I couldn't remember the last time I'd slept that long without waking. I lay there for a moment, taking inventory of how I felt. There was grief, yes, grief for the family I'd wanted, but never had, for the father who'd never been capable of loving me the way I'd needed. But underneath the grief was something else, relief. The long, exhausting hope that things could be different had finally died, and in its place was clarity. I reached for my phone to check the time, then remembered I'd silenced it. When I turned it over and the screen lit up, my stomach dropped. The notification bar was packed solid. I unlocked the phone and watched the numbers climb as messages and call logs loaded 112 missed calls, 73 text messages, 15 voicemails. I scrolled through the call log first. My father's number appeared 47 times. My mother's 23 times. Evan's 19 times. The rest were from relatives whose numbers I barely recognized: Aunt Carol, Uncle Jim, cousins I hadn't spoken to in a decade. The calls had started at midnight, just 2 hours after I'd left, and continued through the night at irregular intervals. The last one had come in at 9:45 a.m. The text messages painted a picture of escalating desperation. From my mother, 12 at 17 a.m. Please call me. Your father is very upset. We need to talk about this. From Evan, 12:43 a.m. You're making a huge mistake. Call me back. From my father, 1:15 a.m. This is unacceptable. You will contact me immediately. As the night wore on, the tone shifted. My mother, 31 a.m. Melissa, please, I'm worried about you. Just let me know you're safe. 3:18 a.m. Look, maybe we came on too strong. Can we just talk? Just talk, that's all. My father. 02 a.m. You're being childish and selfish. This behavior is exactly why we had problems in the first place. By morning, the messages had devolved into bargaining. My father. 23 a.m. Perhaps we were hasty with the numbers. We can discuss a more reasonable arrangement. Evan. 8:15 a.m. What if we only asked for $2 million? That's more than fair. You'd still have plenty left. Aunt Carol, 8:47 a.m. Your father is beside himself. This is tearing the family apart. Is money really more important than family? I sat on the edge of the hotel bed reading through them all with a strange detachment. These weren't messages from people who'd realized they'd done something wrong and wanted to apologize. These were messages from people who'd lost access to something they believed they were entitled to and who were trying every manipulation tactic they knew to regain control. The voicemails I didn't listen to. I could imagine what they said. But one message stood out from all the family chaos. It had come in at 6:47 a.m. from Harrison. Finished the full audit overnight. It's worse than we thought. Can you come to the office at 10 a.m.? Bring someone you trust. My stomach tightened. I looked at the clock again, 10:27 a.m. I was already late. I called Harrison immediately. He answered before the first ring finished. Melissa, where are you? Hotel downtown. I just woke up and saw your message. What's worse than we thought? Not over the phone, he said. How fast can you get here? 20 minutes. I'll be waiting. I called Linda next. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm with concern. Good morning, sweetheart. How did it go? Exactly as badly as you predicted, I said. Listen, I need a favor. Can you meet me at my attorney's office in 20 minutes? Harrison found something, and he wants a witness. Her tone sharpened immediately. What kind of something? He wouldn't say over the phone, but Linda, he sounded worried. Text me the address. I'm leaving now. I got dressed quickly, didn't bother with makeup, grabbed my purse and coat, and was in my car within 5 minutes. My phone buzzed continuously with new calls and messages from my family. I ignored them all. Harrison's office was in a modest building near the courthouse, the kind of place where good lawyers worked without needing expensive trappings to prove their competence. I'd chosen him 6 years ago based on recommendations from other small business owners, and he'd never let me down. Linda's car pulled into the parking lot at the same time as mine. She got out elegant, even at 10:45 on Christmas morning, in slacks and a wool coat, and pulled me into a tight hug. You okay? She asked. I don't know yet, I admitted. We walked into the building together. Harrison's office was on the 3rd floor. His receptionist wasn't there. It was Christmas Day after all, but his door was open, and I could see him inside surrounded by papers and manila folders, looking like he'd been up all night. He stood when he saw us, his face grave. Melissa, Ms. Carter, thank you for coming. What did you find? I asked, not bothering with pleasantries. Harrison gestured to the chairs across from his desk. We sat. He remained standing, organizing papers like he was preparing to present a case to a jury. When you gave me that sealed file 6 years ago, he began, you told me you suspected your father had used your identity when you were younger. You didn't have proof, just fragments, strange credit denials, collection notices sent to addresses you'd never lived at. We documented what we could, but most of it was circumstantial. I remember, I said. Last night I started digging deeper. I pulled your full credit history, cross-referenced every address and transaction, subpoenaed bank records from institutions that showed suspicious activity. He paused, meeting my eyes. Your father forged more than your signature. The words hung in the air like a physical weight. How much more? I asked quietly. Harrison opened the first folder. A lot more. Harrison spread the first set of documents across his desk with the careful precision of a surgeon laying out instruments. Each page was flagged with colored tabs, organized chronologically, annotated with his neat handwriting. Let's start with the biggest one, he said. In March 2015, when you were 19 years old, someone using your identity purchased a house at 847 Riverside Drive for $220,000. He slid a mortgage application toward me. There was my name typed neatly at the top, Melissa Rose Harper, my social security number, my date of birth, and at the bottom a signature that looked almost like mine, close enough to pass casual inspection, but wrong in subtle ways I recognized immediately. The loops were different. The slant was off. "That's not my signature," I said, my voice hollow. "I know," Harrison said gently. "I had it analyzed by a forensic handwriting expert last night. She confirmed it's a forgery, but here's where it gets calculated." He pulled out another stack of papers, bank statements, payment records, spreadsheets. For 8 years, monthly mortgage payments were made like clockwork. Always on time, never late. The payments came from your father's account, but the paper trail makes it look like you were the responsible party making regular contributions. Linda leaned forward, studying the documents. "Who lives at this address?" "Evan," I said quietly, the pieces clicking together. "It's the house Evan's been living in. He always said he was renting it cheap from some family friend." "He was living there rent-free," Harrison corrected. "But your father told him it was rent-collected monthly payments from Evan, payments that went straight toward the mortgage on a house Evan thought belonged to someone else, but was actually fraudulently purchased in your name." The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. My father had created an elaborate system to hide his crime while simultaneously extorting money from Evan and building a paper trail that made the fraud look legitimate. "For 8 years this continued," Harrison went on. 8 years of regular payments establishing a pattern. Then 6 months ago, the payments stopped. Completely. Not late stopped. 6 months ago, I repeated. That's when the article about your company appeared in the local business journal," Harrison finished. "I checked the dates. 3 days after that article was published, your father hired a private investigator. 2 weeks after that, the mortgage payments ceased." Linda's hand found mine squeezing tight. Harrison pulled out another document, a stack of notices on bank letterhead. "The default notices were sent here." He pointed to an address I didn't recognize. "It's a P.O. box registered in your name at a location you've never lived near. Your father set it up 9 years ago, probably at the same time as the mortgage fraud. He's been collecting your mail at that box for years." "That's why I never knew," I whispered. "Exactly. But now the bank has passed the grace period for those notices. As of 2 weeks ago, they filed intent to foreclose. And because the property is in your name, they're coming after you for the full outstanding balance, $220,000, plus 6 months of late fees and penalties. Current total, $237,000. The number felt unreal. I'd worked so hard to build financial security, and now I was being told I owed $250,000 for a house I'd never lived in, never seen, never agreed to purchase. "Can we prove it's fraud?" Linda asked, ever practical. "Yes," Harrison said firmly. "Between the handwriting analysis, the fact that Melissa was 19 and had no income at the time of purchase, the P.O. box registration in her name that she never authorized, and the timing of when payments stopped, we can build an airtight case. But it takes time, and the bank doesn't care about fraud claims until they're proven in court. Right now, legally, you're liable." "What happens if I can't prove it fast enough?" I asked. "They can pursue your business assets, put liens on your property, freeze accounts. It would be temporary. Eventually we'd win, but it could cripple your company in the short term." I felt sick. This was the trap. My father had spent 8 years building leverage, creating a financial bomb with my name on it. The moment he learned I was successful, he stopped making payments and let the bomb start ticking. Then he invited me to Christmas dinner and offered me a choice: give him $6 million voluntarily, or fight him in court while the bank pursued me for hundreds of thousands I didn't actually owe. "There's more," Harrison said quietly. I looked up at him. "More." He pulled out another folder. 3 credit cards, all opened in your name between 2015 and 2016, when you were 19 and 20. Total credit limit across all 3, $65,000. All maxed out within 6 months of opening. All sent to collections. I never had credit cards, I said. I couldn't even qualify for one back then. I know. These applications list your father's address, a fictitious employer, and fabricated income information. Classic identity theft. But here's the interesting part. And he pulled out credit reports, recent ones. These debts should still be on your credit report, destroying your score, but they're not there anymore. Why not? Because someone's been making minimum payments on them for years, not enough to pay them off, but enough to keep them from going to judgment or appearing as active collections on your report. Small payments, irregular timing, just enough to keep them alive, but invisible. Linda understood before I did. He was keeping them as backup leverage. Harrison nodded. If she ever got successful enough to check her credit for business loans or major purchases, these wouldn't show up. But he kept them active, kept proof of the fraud available in case he ever needed to use them. Between the 3 cards with interest and fees accumulated over 9 years, the current balance is approximately $93,000. I did the math numbly. So between the house and the credit cards, I'm supposedly liable for over $300,000 in debt I never incurred. Plus whatever else we haven't found yet, Harrison said grimly. I'm still digging. There might be more. The room felt too small, too hot. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot below. Christmas morning. Most people were with family, opening presents, eating breakfast, pretending everything was fine. My family had spent Christmas Eve trying to extort me, and I'd just discovered they'd spent the better part of a decade building the infrastructure to destroy me financially if I didn't comply. How did I not know? I asked the window. How did none of this ever surface? Because he was careful, Harrison said. He used addresses you didn't monitor, timed everything, for when you were young and wouldn't be checking credit reports, made just enough payments to keep everything under the radar. This wasn't impulsive. This was systematic, long-term fraud with the specific intention of creating leverage he could use against you later. Can we prove that intent? Linda asked. The timing of when payments stopped 3 days after learning about her success helps establish intent. Combined with last night's ambush with prepared legal documents, we can show a pattern of predatory behavior. I turned back to face them. What do? We fight, Harrison said simply. We file police reports for identity theft and fraud. We work with the bank to prove the mortgage fraud. We pursue criminal charges if you want to go that route. We protect your assets while the legal process unfolds. And we make absolutely certain he can never do this to you again. I thought about my father's face last night, so confident, so certain I would break. He'd thought he held all the cards. He'd thought the threat of being disowned, combined with the hidden financial time bombs, would force me to comply. He'd underestimated me. Do it, I said. All of it. File everything. I want him to face consequences for every crime he committed. Harrison's expression was grim, but satisfied. There's one more thing you need to know. It's about Evan. My stomach dropped. But Evan's secrets were even darker. Harrison pulled out a third folder, this one noticeably thicker than the others. The tab was labeled Evan Miller, Federal Investigation. When I started digging into your family's financial activities, he said, I found something that goes beyond simple fraud. Your brother is under federal investigation for wire fraud and elder abuse. I sank back into my chair. Federal investigation, FBI Cybercrimes Division. They've been building a case for approximately 8 months. He opened the folder and pulled out printed screenshots, bank records, and what looked like official government documents. Evan has been running multiple online scam operations targeting elderly victims. Fake investment opportunities, romance scams, tech support fraud, the usual predatory tactics aimed at people who aren't digitally sophisticated. He spread out the screenshots, fake websites promising guaranteed returns, romantic messages from stolen photos of attractive people, urgent warnings about computer viruses that required immediate payment to fix. All of it professional-looking enough to fool someone who didn't know better. Over the past 4 years, investigators have identified 67 victims across 14 states. Total estimated theft, approximately $1.2 million. The number made me physically ill. $1.2 million. most of which immediately disappeared into online gambling sites and cryptocurrency schemes. Your brother is what investigators call a churn scammer. He takes the money and loses it almost as fast as he steals it, then needs to scam more people to cover his debts. It's a cycle that escalates rapidly. Linda's face had gone pale. 67 victims. That's not some kid making a mistake. That's systematic predation. The victims are predominantly women over 65, Harrison continued. Widows, retirees, people living on fixed incomes. Several lost their entire retirement savings. The FBI report mentions at least 2 suicide attempts directly connected to financial devastation from your brother's scams. I couldn't speak. I'd known Evan was troubled, knew he gambled and made poor choices, but this level of calculated cruelty was beyond what I'd imagined. These were real people whose lives he'd destroyed for money he immediately gambled away. "There's more," Harrison said, and his expression grew even more serious. "Evan used your identity as cover." He pulled out another set of documents, email addresses, online account registrations, business filings for shell companies. Each one used variations of my name, my old addresses, my information. He created accounts under names like M.R. Harper, Melissa Harper Miller, M. Rose Harper, used old addresses from when you were 18-19, built a false identity trail that, if authorities traced it without context, could potentially implicate you as either a co-conspirator or the primary perpetrator. "He set me up," I said slowly, understanding flooding through me. "If he got caught, I'd take the fall. Or at minimum, you'd be investigated alongside him. It's a shield tactic criminals often use family members' identities, knowing that even if the truth comes out eventually, it buys them time and creates confusion. And in this case, your father likely knew and approved because it protected Evan." "Can we prove I wasn't involved?" I asked. "Yes. You have a documented business history tax returns showing legitimate income, no connection to any of the victim interactions. But you'll need to make a formal statement to the FBI and provide evidence of identity theft." The good news is they already suspect Evan is using false identities. This will help their case, not hurt yours. "When does this go to prosecution?" Linda asked. "That's unclear. Federal cases move slowly, but the investigator I spoke with indicated they're in final evidence-gathering stages. Within 6 months, possibly sooner, your brother will be arrested and charged. Wire fraud carries 20 years. Elder abuse can add another 5 to 10. He's looking at serious prison time." I thought about Evan sitting at that dinner table last night demanding I buy him a house acting entitled to my money. He'd been living on borrowed time, surrounded by evidence of his own crimes, knowing federal investigators were circling, and his solution was to extort his sister. "I need to call the FBI," I said. "Today. I need them to know I had nothing to do with this." "I have the contact information for the lead investigator," Harrison said. "I'll set up a meeting for tomorrow if possible." "But Melissa, there's something else you should know." He pulled out one more document, and his expression softened into something like sympathy. "One of the victims listed in the FBI report is named Jean Mitchell, age 62, lost $18,000 to a fake investment scheme in August. The scammer identified himself as Evan Miller." The world tilted sideways. Jean, my Jean. The woman who worked beside me every day, who'd become my friend and confidant, who taught me it was okay to rest sometimes. Evan had stolen her retirement savings. "Does she know?" I whispered. "I don't know. The FBI doesn't contact victims until they're ready to prosecute. But if she received the scam email, she knows she was defrauded. She might not know it was your brother." I looked at the clock on Harrison's wall, 11:43 a.m. "I need to go. I need to talk to her." "Melissa," Harrison started. "Now," I said, standing up. "Right now." And Linda drove me back to my workshop, neither of us speaking. My mind was racing through every conversation I'd had with Jean over the past few months. Had she seemed stressed? Withdrawn? Had there been signs I'd missed because I was too focused on my own work? My workshop was closed for Christmas, but I had keys. I let myself in, Linda following silently behind me. The space felt different, empty, all the usual sounds of work, absent, leaving only echoing silence. I pulled out my phone and called Jean's number. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice thick like she'd been crying. "Melissa, is everything okay?" "Are you at home?" I asked gently. Can I come over? I need to talk to you about something important." There was a long pause. Then, in a voice so small I barely recognized it, "You know, don't you, about the money?" My heart broke. "I just found out. I'm so sorry, Jean. I'm so sorry. Can I come over?" "I'm not home," she said. I'm parked outside a house on Riverside Drive. I've been sitting here for an hour trying to decide if I'm brave enough to knock on the door." My blood ran cold. "What house number?" 847. Evan's house. The house fraudulently purchased in my name. The house where my brother lived. "Jean," I said carefully, keeping my voice calm, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Don't knock on that door. Don't get out of your car. Stay exactly where you are. I'm coming to you right now. Can you do that for me?" "I just wanted to look him in the eye," she said, and her voice cracked. "I wanted him to see what he did to me. That was my whole retirement, Melissa. Everything I saved for 30 years. I can't even afford to keep my apartment anymore." "I know," I said, already moving toward the door, Linda right behind me. "I know, and I promise you he's going to face consequences. But right now, I need you to stay in your car. Don't confront him. Promise me." Another long pause. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay, I'll wait." I hung up and ran for Linda's car, and one of those victims was about to take matters into her own hands. Linda drove faster than I'd ever seen her drive, her hands tight on the wheel, her face set in grim determination. We reached Riverside Drive in 12 minutes, and I spotted Jean's car, immediately a faded blue sedan parked across the street from 847 engine running. I jumped out before Linda had fully stopped and ran to Jean's driver's side window. She looked up at me with eyes so devastated, so emptied of hope, that I wanted to cry. "I'm here," I said, opening her door. "Come on, get out. You're not alone in this." She stepped out shakily, and I pulled her into a tight hug. She collapsed against me, her whole body trembling with suppressed sobs. Linda approached quietly, standing guard, while I held my friend together. "He took everything," Jean whispered against my shoulder. "The email looked so professional. The website looked real. He said it was a guaranteed return, 6 months low risk. I thought I was being smart, making my retirement money work harder. I'm so stupid." "You're not stupid," I said fiercely. "You were targeted by a professional con artist who makes his living exploiting people's trust. This isn't your fault." "I should have told you," she said, pulling back to look at me. "But I was so ashamed. You trusted me to help run your business, and I fell for something so obvious. What kind of person?" "A trusting person," I interrupted. "A good person who believes people are honest until proven otherwise. That's not a weakness, Jean. That's decency." And he weaponized it. "How did you find out?" she asked. Before I could answer, a car pulled up behind Linda's, a dark sedan with tinted windows. A man got out, mid-50s Asian, wearing a professional suit and carrying a leather messenger bag. He approached us with the careful, non-threatening body language of someone trained not to escalate situations. "Melissa Harper?" he asked, looking directly at me. I tensed immediately, stepping slightly in front of Jean. "Who's asking?" He pulled out a business card and held it where I could see it. Marcus Chen, private investigator, licensed and bonded. "I've been looking for you, Ms. Harper. I was actually headed to your parents' house to speak with your father, but I saw Mrs. Mitchell's car parked here and thought I should check. She's been to this location twice this week." "You've been following me?" Jean asked, her voice shaking. "Monitoring, not following," Marcus corrected gently. "I've been investigating Evan Miller for 3 months, hired by a coalition of his victims. You're one of 67 people he's defrauded. I've been keeping track of victim movements to ensure no one confronted him before law enforcement was ready to act." "I'm one of 67, Jean repeated, and somehow that seemed to hit her harder than anything else. She wasn't even unique in her victimization. She was just one more mark in a long line. Marcus turned his attention back to me. "Ms. Harper, I need to speak with you about your brother and your father. I have evidence that concerns you directly." "My father?" I asked, confused. "What does he have to do with Evan's scams?" "More than you realize. Is there somewhere we can talk privately? Not here, not at your parents' house, somewhere neutral." Linda spoke up. "My house is 10 minutes away. We can talk there." 20 minutes later, we were gathered in Linda's elegant living room, me, Linda, Jean, and Marcus Chen, who'd spread documents across the coffee table with the methodical precision of someone who'd done this many times before. "I was hired 4 months ago by a group of victims who pooled resources to investigate Evan Miller," Marcus began. "They wanted to know who he really was, where their money went, and whether they had any chance of recovery. What I found was worse than simple fraud." He pulled out a thick folder. "Your brother has been running scam operations for at least 4 years, possibly longer. He targets elderly victims almost exclusively, people who are isolated, recently widowed, financially unsophisticated. The scams vary, but they all follow similar patterns: establish trust, create urgency, extract money, disappear." "I know," I said quietly. "My attorney found the FBI investigation this morning." Marcus nodded. "Then you know the federal government is involved. What you might not know is the role your father played." He pulled out printed text messages, screenshots of email exchanges, and what looked like recorded phone conversations transcribed to text. "Your father wasn't just aware of Evan's criminal activities, he was actively coaching him, teaching him how to avoid detection, suggesting he use your identity as cover, helping him set up shell companies and fake addresses." He slid several documents toward me. "These are text exchanges between your father and Evan from the past 2 years. I read them with growing horror. "Dad, use your sister's old address from when she was 18. She's not monitoring it." Evan: "What if she finds out? Dad, she won't. And even if she does, who do you think police will believe, successful businessman's son or some girl with a crafts hobby?" Another exchange, more recent, Evan: "The FBI contacted one of the victims. They're asking questions." Dad: "Stop using your real name. Use variations of Melissa's. Create confusion. I'll handle it if anything comes back." "He knew," I said, my voice hollow. "He knew Evan was stealing from people, knew he was using my identity, and he helped cover it up." "More than that," Marcus said. "He's been making minimum payments on debts fraudulently opened in your name, specifically to maintain leverage over you. The mortgage, the credit cards, those weren't just theft. They were insurance. If you ever became successful, he'd have a way to control you or destroy you, whichever was more useful." Jean made a small sound of distress. "Your own father did this to you." "He's done worse," Linda said quietly, her hand finding mine. Marcus pulled out a USB drive and set it on the table. "Everything is on here. Evan's scam operation in detail. Victim testimonies I've collected. Financial records showing money movement. Text messages and emails proving your father's involvement, screenshots of the fake websites and email templates, and most importantly, evidence that you had nothing to do with any of it, documentation of your legitimate business proof you were in different states when many of the scams occurred, witnesses who can testify to your character." "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked. "Because I've been working with the FBI for 3 months building this case, and they asked me to verify whether you were a victim or a co-conspirator. I watched your family for weeks. I saw how your father and brother operated. And then I watched you at that Christmas dinner, watched them try to extort you, watched you refuse, watched you walk away." He met my eyes directly. "You're not part of this. You're a victim just like Mrs. Mitchell and the other 66 people your brother stole from." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you go to the FBI, I'll set up the meeting, and you provide a formal statement. You help them understand the full scope of your father's involvement, and you press charges for every crime they committed against you: identity theft, fraud, forgery, conspiracy." He paused. "This isn't just fraud anymore, Ms. Harper. This is organized family conspiracy. Your father orchestrated a years-long scheme to control you financially and protect your brother's criminal enterprise. With this evidence, both of them are looking at serious federal prison time." I looked at the USB drive, this small object that contained the power to destroy what remained of my family. 10 years ago, that would have felt impossible. 10 years ago, I still hoped my father could change, could love me, could see me as valuable. But that hope had died last night at a Christmas dinner table, surrounded by people who saw me as nothing more than a resource to exploit. "Give me the FBI contact information," I said. "I'll testify to everything. Every crime, every lie, Every manipulation. Marcus nodded and pulled out his phone. I'll call Special Agent Morrison right now. She's been waiting for you. As he stepped away to make the call, Jean spoke up quietly. Melissa, I can't let you do this alone. If you're testifying about what he did to you, I want to testify about what he did to me. To all of us. You don't have to. I want to, she said firmly. He needs to see that we're not just numbers, not just marks. We're real people whose lives he destroyed, and he needs to face all of us. Linda squeezed my hand. You're not alone in this. You were never alone. You just didn't know it yet. I looked at the USB drive again, understanding fully what it represented, and the evidence on that USB would destroy them all. The call came 3 days later, on December 28th at 7 in the morning. My mother's number. I'd been expecting it. Melissa? Her voice was ragged, desperate. Please, you need to come home, right now. There are people here, official people, asking questions about Evan. Your father is, please just come, we need you. Who's there, Mom? FBI agents. They have a warrant. They're searching Evan's room, taking his computers. They keep asking about you, about your name being on accounts. Melissa, what's happening? What's happening is that Evan committed federal crimes and used my identity to do it, I said calmly. The FBI knows I'm not involved. I gave them a statement 2 days ago. You what? Her voice climbed to near hysteria. You talked to them, without telling us, without Melissa. That's your brother. How could I? I repeated, my voice hardening. How could I report the person who stole my identity to commit fraud? How could I protect myself from being implicated in crimes I didn't commit? Is that really what you're asking me? Silence, then quieter. Your father wants to talk to you. Please, just come home, just for an hour. We can fix this as a family. I'll be there in an hour, I said. But we're not fixing anything. We're having a conversation about consequences. I called Harrison and Marcus. They want a family meeting. FBI just executed a search warrant on Evan. Perfect timing, Harrison said. I have everything ready. Marcus, can you meet us there? Already on my way, Marcus replied. When I pulled up to my parents' house an hour later, the street was chaos. 2 FBI vehicles were parked in the driveway. Neighbors stood on their porches watching. Through the front window, I could see agents moving through rooms with boxes of evidence. I walked past them all and into the house. My father stood in the living room, his face mottled red with rage, barely contained. Evan sat on the couch, head in his hands, looking like he might vomit. My mother hovered between them, wringing her hands, her face blotchy from crying. The FBI agents nodded at me. They knew who I was. Special Agent Morrison, whom I'd met 2 days ago, gave me a small, reassuring nod before returning to her evidence collection. You, my father said, his voice shaking with fury. You did this. You called them. You turned in your own brother. I reported identity theft, I said calmly. I reported fraud. I protected myself from being implicated in crimes I didn't commit. He's your family, he shouted. You don't destroy family. You protect them. The way you protected me, I interrupted. The way you protected me when you threw me out at 18, when you forged my signature to steal my identity, when you helped Evan use my name to commit federal crimes. Evan's head shot up. You don't know what you're talking about. I know everything, I said. I know about the 67 victims. I know about the $1.2 million. I know that one of those victims was Jean Mitchell, a woman I consider family, who you stole $18,000 from. I know Dad helped you. I have the text messages. Evan went white. My father's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. My mother just cried quietly, like she'd known this moment was coming and had been dreading it for years. You can't do this, my father finally managed. You can't just, there are debt collectors calling. The bank is threatening foreclosure on that house. People are talking, spreading rumors. The whole family is falling apart because of you, because you're being selfish and vindictive instead of helping the people who raised you. The audacity was almost impressive. You want to talk about that house? I asked. The one you bought in my name without my knowledge or consent, the one you made payments on for 8 years to create a paper trail, then stopped paying the moment you learned I was successful. That house. I was trying to help your brother, he said, giving him a place to live so he could get on his feet. That's what family does. And yes, I used your credit because yours was better, but I always planned to transfer it to his name once he was stable. That's identity theft and mortgage fraud, I said. That's a federal crime. It's family business, he snapped. And you had no right to bring outsiders into it. No right to talk to the FBI to hire lawyers to turn this into some kind of legal circus. This should have stayed in the family. Where you could continue to control it, I said. Where you could continue to threaten me, manipulate me, use me as your personal credit line and scapegoat. I gave you life, he roared. I raised you. I kept a roof over your head, food in your mouth, clothes on your back for 18 years. You owe me for that. You owe this family. His delusion was so complete, so total, that I almost felt sorry for him. He genuinely couldn't comprehend that the power dynamic had shifted, that the worthless daughter he'd discarded now held his fate in her hands, that no amount of shouting or guilt or manipulation would work anymore because I'd finally completely stopped caring about his approval. I don't owe you anything, I said quietly. And today we're going to have a conversation based on legal reality, not on your fantasy of what family means. I set my briefcase on the coffee table and pulled out a thick folder Harrison had prepared. It was organized with tabs, each section clearly labeled mortgage, fraud, identity, theft, credit card, fraud, conspiracy, witness statements, forensic evidence. Sit down, I said. All of you. My father started to argue, but Marcus Chen walked through the front door. At that moment, his presence somehow commanding immediate attention. I'd recommend you sit down, Mr. Harper. What Ms. Harper has to show you is going to take a while. My father's eyes went to Marcus, then back to me, calculation flickering across his face. Who the hell is this? Marcus Chen, private investigator hired by your son's victims, Marcus said calmly. I've been working with the FBI for 3 months. I'm here as a witness to this conversation. Harrison walked in behind him carrying his own briefcase. Harrison Mitchell, Ms. Harper's attorney. I'm also here as a witness and legal counsel. My father looked around the room at me, at Marcus, at Harrison, at the FBI agent still cataloging evidence in the next room, and I saw the moment reality finally began to penetrate his delusions. His face went from red to white in seconds. Melissa, my mother whispered, what are you doing? What I should have done years ago, I said, taking control of my own life and protecting myself from the people who tried to destroy it. I opened the folder. When I opened that folder, the room froze. I pulled out the first section labeled Forensic Analysis and laid the documents across the coffee table where everyone could see them. Side-by-side comparisons of signatures mined genuine from my driver's license and bank accounts next to the forged versions from the mortgage application and credit card documents. This is a certified forensic handwriting analysis, I said, my voice steady and professional. Conducted by Dr. Patricia Williams, a court-recognized expert with 23 years of experience. She examined every signature on the mortgage documents, the credit card applications, and the P.O. Box registration. Her conclusion, none of these signatures are mine. Every single one is a forgery. I slid the expert's report toward my father. His hands shook as he picked it up, his eyes scanning the technical terminology and damning conclusions. The analysis shows consistent patterns in the forgeries, I continued. The same hand wrote all of them, attempting to mimic my signature, but failing in measurable, identifiable ways. The loop formations are wrong. The pressure points are different. The slant is inconsistent with my natural handwriting. Dr. Williams testified that these discrepancies would be invisible to casual inspection, but are unmistakable under forensic examination. My mother made a small, whimpering sound. Evan had gone completely still, his face the color of ash. Next section, I said, pulling out bank records. These show every transaction related to the fraudulent mortgage. The application was submitted on March 15, 2015 at 2:47 p.m. from a bank branch on Miller Street. I was in a different city that day working my shift at Martinez Bakery. I have time cards, security footage, and witness statements confirming I was nowhere near that bank branch. I laid out the timeline Harrison had constructed, a minute-by-minute accounting of where I was, what I was doing, who saw me on the day each fraudulent document was signed. I have similar documentation for the credit card applications, I said. 3 cards opened between June 2015 and February 2016. In each case, I was verifiably somewhere else when the applications were submitted in person. I was at work, I was at my apartment, I was documented and witnessed. I couldn't have signed these documents because I wasn't there. This is circumstantial, my father stammered. You can't prove— I can prove everything, I interrupted. Which brings us to the next section. I pulled out the evidence. Marcus had compiled screenshots of text messages between my father and Evan, printed and annotated with dates, times, and context. These are text messages from your phone, I said, looking directly at my father. Messages where you coached Evan on how to commit fraud using my identity. Messages where you helped him avoid detection. Messages where you actively participated in the conspiracy. I read them aloud one by one, my voice never wavering. Use your sister's old address from when she was 18. She's not monitoring it. Create variations of Melissa's name. Make it look like she's involved if anyone investigates. I'll make the minimum payments on those credit cards. Keep them active but off her radar. Insurance in case we need leverage later, my mother gasped. You said those accounts were mistakes. You said they were billing errors that you were helping fix. He lied, I said simply. He knew exactly what he was doing. He created this entire infrastructure of fraud with the specific intention of controlling me if I ever became successful enough to escape his influence. I pulled out the next section, Evan's scam operation, in brutal detail. Screenshots of the fake investment websites with their professional-looking layouts and testimonials from made-up clients. Email templates Evan had used carefully, worded to create urgency and trust. Logs showing IP addresses, transaction patterns, the digital footprint of a systematic criminal enterprise. Your son scammed 67 people, I said. Elderly people, mostly women, mostly widows. He stole $1.2 million over 4 years. These are their stories. I laid out victim impact statements Marcus had collected, handwritten letters from people whose lives had been destroyed. I lost my entire retirement savings. I'm 72 years old, and I can't afford my medication anymore. My mother gave him everything she had. She attempted suicide 3 weeks later. I trusted him. He sounded so kind, so professional. I thought I was making a smart investment. Evan made a choking sound and looked away. And here, I said, pulling out the most damning evidence, are messages showing Dad knew about all of it and helped cover it up. Text messages where my father advised Evan which victims to target, which lies would be most effective, how to move money to avoid detection, how to use my identity as a shield. You weren't just aware, I said, looking at my father. You were an active participant, an accessory to federal crimes. You coached him, protected him, and helped him use my name to do it. My father's face had gone from white to gray. I was trying to help my son. That's what fathers do. No, I said. That's what criminals do. Fathers teach right from wrong. Criminals teach how to avoid consequences. Harrison stepped forward and placed another document on the table, a legal memo about statute of limitations. Mr. Harper, you might be thinking that these crimes are old enough to be past the statute of limitations, Harrison said. You'd be wrong, because you actively concealed the fraud from Ms. Harper, controlling the P.O. box, intercepting mail, making minimum payments to keep accounts off her radar. The clock doesn't start from when the crime was committed. It starts from when she discovered it. He let that sink in. She discovered it 3 days ago. The statute of limitations clock started then. Every crime you committed, mortgage fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, is currently actionable. You can be charged today. You can be prosecuted today. You face up to 30 years in federal prison for the combined charges. My father stood up suddenly, his chair scraping across the floor. You can't do this. You can't destroy your own family over money and some stupid mistakes. I'm your father. You owe me. I owe you nothing, I said, standing to face him. And these aren't mistakes. Mistakes are accidental. This was deliberate, systematic, calculated fraud that you perpetrated against your own daughter for years. You built a trap, set it, and waited for the right moment to spring it. Well, congratulations. You sprung it, and now you're caught in it." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the FBI agents in the next room seemed to have paused their evidence collection to listen. "So what now?" Evan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're going to send us to prison, your own family." I looked at him. This person who'd sabotaged me at 18, who'd stolen from elderly widows, who'd used my name as a shield for his crimes, and felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no grief. Just emptiness where family love should have been. "That depends," I said slowly. "On what?" my father asked. "On whether you agree to my terms." Unless, of course, they agreed to my terms. Harrison pulled 3 documents from his briefcase and laid them on the table with deliberate precision. Each was typed on official legal letterhead. Each had signature lines marked with bright yellow tabs. Each represented a different aspect of my terms. "These are your options," I said, my voice calm and controlled. "Option 1, I press full criminal charges for everything. Mortgage fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, accessory to elder abuse. The FBI already has Evan on their radar. Adding Dad's involvement makes it a family conspiracy case. Federal prosecutors love those. You're both looking at decades in prison." My father's jaw clenched. Evan looked like he might pass out. "Option 2, I continued. "You agree to the terms in these documents. You face consequences, but not criminal prosecution. At least not from me. The FBI still has their case against Evan, but I won't actively cooperate beyond the statement I've already given. And Dad's involvement stays between us unless he violates the agreement." "What terms?" my father asked, his voice hoarse. I picked up the first document. "Dad, you will sign a notarized confession admitting to identity theft, mortgage fraud, and conspiracy. You will accept full financial and legal responsibility for all debts fraudulently created in my name. This confession will be held in escrow by Mr. Patterson, a criminal defense attorney Harrison works with. If you ever contact me asking for money, if you ever use my name or credit again, if you commit any similar act against me or anyone else, this confession gets filed immediately with law enforcement." His hands trembled as I slid the document toward him. He picked it up and read it, his face cycling through rage, fear, and something that might have been recognition that he'd finally lost control. "You'll also sign a financial liability agreement," I continued. "You take full legal responsibility for the mortgage on 847 Riverside Drive and all associated debts. The bank will be notified that the property was fraudulently obtained using my identity. You'll work with them to transfer the deed to your name or Evan's name, or you'll let them foreclose. Either way, my name comes off that mortgage, and you deal with the consequences." "That house is worth less than we owe on it," he said. "If it forecloses, it'll destroy my credit." "Then you should have thought of that before you bought it in my name," I said. "Those are the terms, non-negotiable." I turned to Evan. "Your terms are simpler. You sign a legally binding no-contact order. 10 years. 0 communication with me. No calls, no emails, no texts, no social media contact. No showing up at my business or home, no indirect contact through family members or mutual acquaintances. You don't mention my name, you don't ask about me, you pretend I don't exist." 10 years, he said, his voice cracking. That's insane. You're my sister." "You used my identity to commit federal crimes," I said. "You stole from people I care about. You tried to make me look like a co-conspirator. You asked me to buy you a house 3 days ago while actively destroying elderly people's lives. You don't get to claim family ties now." I slid the document toward him. "If you violate this agreement even once, 1 phone call, 1 message, 1 attempt at contact, 2 things happen immediately. Dad's confession gets filed with law enforcement, and I contact Special Agent Morrison and tell her I'm ready to provide full cooperation on your case. I'll testify about every conversation we've ever had where you mentioned scamming people, every time you asked me for money, every piece of evidence that shows a pattern of lifelong fraud and entitlement." Evan's face had gone green. "You'd really do that? Send your own brother to prison for decades? You really stole $18,000 from a 62-year-old woman who'd been saving for retirement her entire life," I countered. "So yes, I'd really do that." He looked down at the document, his hands shaking. I turned to my mother, who'd been sitting frozen throughout this entire exchange, tears streaming silently down her face. "Mom, your terms are different," I said, and my voice softened slightly. "I don't need a legal document from you. I just need the truth." She looked up at me, eyes red and swollen. "What truth?" "The whole story. Everything. Why Dad has hated me since before I can remember. Why his contempt for me is so visceral, so personal. Why he's treated me like an enemy my entire life." I paused. "I know some of it. Linda told me about Grandma Eleanor, about how she opposed the marriage. But there's more, isn't there? Something you've never told me." My mother's face crumpled completely. She looked at my father, who'd gone rigid in his chair. "Don't," he said sharply. "Don't you dare." "She deserves to know," my mother whispered. "She deserves nothing," he snarled. "We gave her life, we raised her, and this is how she repays us, by threatening us, blackmailing us, destroying this family." "You destroyed this family," I said. "Decades ago. I'm just finally seeing it clearly." My mother stood up shakily and walked to the window, her back to all of us. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet I had to strain to hear it. "Tell me the truth about what happened when I was 18, I said. "Tell me why he really kicked me out. Tell me everything." "If you do this," my father warned, "if you tell her we're done, you and me, finished." My mother laughed a broken, bitter sound. "We've been finished for 30 years. I've just been too afraid to admit it." She turned to face me, and I saw something in her expression I'd never seen before: defiance. Small and fragile, but there. "These terms aren't just about legal protection, are they?" she asked me. "You want to understand. You need to know why." "Yes," I said simply. "And if I tell you everything, the whole truth about your father, about our marriage, about you, you'll let them sign these papers instead of pressing charges?" I looked at Harrison, who nodded slightly. The terms were solid either way. "Yes," I said. "The truth is the price for my silence about Dad's crimes. That's the deal." My mother took a deep breath, wiped her eyes, and looked directly at me. "Your father didn't just hate you because you looked like my mother," she said. "He hated you because you're not his daughter. You never were." The room went completely silent, and that truth shattered everything I believed. The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. I stared at my mother, unable to process what she'd just said. Behind me, I heard Linda draw in a sharp breath. "What?" I whispered. My father stood up abruptly, his chair crashing backward. "Shut your mouth, right now. We had an agreement. An agreement you forced on me 30 years ago." My mother said, her voice stronger now, like saying the words out loud had broken something open inside her. "An agreement built on threats and control and fear. I'm done with it. I'm done with all of it." She turned to face me fully, and I saw decades of suppressed truth written in the lines of her face. "I need to start at the beginning," she said. "Before you were born, before I married him." She gestured toward my father without looking at him. "I was 22 years old, working as a secretary at an architecture firm downtown. Your grandmother Eleanor was still alive, then still strong, still the woman who'd raised me to stand up for myself and never settle for less than I deserved." She smiled sadly at the memory. "I met 2 men that year. The first was Michael Carter, Linda's younger brother. He worked at the architecture firm as a draftsman. He was kind, creative, funny. He saw the world differently than anyone I'd ever met. He treated me like an equal, like my opinions mattered. We started dating, and for the first time in my life, I understood what love was supposed to feel like." My father made a disgusted sound. My mother ignored him. "The second man I met was him." She finally looked at my father. "A client at the firm, older, established, financially secure. He pursued me aggressively. Flowers, expensive dinners, promises of security and stability. My mother saw through him immediately." "Your grandmother was a meddling," my father started. "She was right," my mother interrupted. She told me he was a man who needed to own, not love. She said she could see it in how he talked about his possessions, his car, his house. Everything was about control and status. She warned me that men like that didn't want partners, they wanted property. But I didn't listen, she continued, her voice breaking. Because I was young and stupid, and he was very convincing. And Michael was wonderful, but he wasn't established yet. He was still figuring out his career, still living paycheck to paycheck. And I wanted security. I wanted the nice house and the stable future. So I broke up with Michael and agreed to marry your father. She wiped her eyes with trembling hands. Your grandmother refused to come to the wedding. She told me she loved me, but she couldn't watch me make the biggest mistake of my life. She said if I married him, she'd always be there when I needed help escaping, but she wouldn't pretend to support the marriage. It caused a huge fight. I said terrible things to her, things I never got to take back. Linda made a small sound of pain. That was her sister my mother was describing, the woman who'd stood firm in her principles, even when it cost her a relationship with her daughter. The marriage was wrong from the start, my mother said. Within 3 months, your father had taken control of everything. All the bank accounts were in his name. I had to ask permission to buy groceries. He monitored my phone calls, questioned where I went, who I talked to. He isolated me from my friends, systematically criticizing them until I was too embarrassed to invite them over, making plans without consulting me, so I had to cancel commitments, being so unpleasant when people visited that they stopped coming. I was protecting you, my father said, from people who wanted to use you, manipulate you. You were trapping me, she said flatly, and I knew it, but I was already pregnant with Evan by then, and I had nowhere to go. My mother had been right, and I was too proud to admit it. She took a shaky breath. When Evan was 2, I ran into Michael Carter at a grocery store. We talked for a few minutes, just catching up. He'd gotten married, was working as a lead designer at a new firm. He looked happy, and seeing him reminded me of who I used to be before I let fear turn me into this hollow version of myself. We started meeting for coffee occasionally. Nothing inappropriate, just old friends talking. He told me about his projects, I told him about Evan, and slowly over months he became the only person in my life who treated me like I had value beyond being someone's wife. My father's face had gone dangerously red, but he stayed silent, perhaps realizing that interrupting would only make things worse. Your grandmother's health was declining then, my mother continued. She had a heart condition. Linda was caring for her, and Michael would visit often. Through Michael, I started reconnecting with my mother. Secret phone calls when your father was at work. Brief visits when I could make excuses to be out of the house. Your grandmother never said, "I told you so." She just held my hand and told me it wasn't too late to leave, that she'd help me, that Linda would help me. I was planning to do it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper now. I was going to take Evan and leave. Your grandmother and Linda were going to help me get a lawyer, find a place to live, establish independence. Michael was helping me prepare, not because he wanted anything from me, but because he was a genuinely good person who hated seeing someone trapped. She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. And then my mother died. Sudden heart attack. She was gone before I could tell her I was sorry, before I could thank her for never giving up on me. Your father wouldn't let me go to the funeral. He said if I went, he'd change the locks, and I'd never see Evan again. He had lawyers, money, family support. I had nothing. So I stayed home and cried while Linda buried our mother alone. Linda was crying now, 2 quiet tears sliding down her face. Michael came to see me after the funeral, my mother continued. He found me when your father was at work. He held me while I sobbed. He told me his sister Linda was devastated that I hadn't been there, but she understood. She knew what I was trapped in. And he told me that we were still going to help me escape, that my mother would have wanted that. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. 2 months later, I found out I was pregnant. With you. The room was absolutely silent except for her ragged breathing. Michael was the father. I knew it with certainty because your father and we barely had a physical relationship by then. Maybe once every few months and always on his terms, his schedule. But Michael and I had been together once, just once, a few weeks after my mother died. We were both grieving, both desperate for comfort, and it happened. We didn't plan it. We didn't mean for it to happen. But it did. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what I was hearing. Michael was thrilled, she said, a sad smile touching her lips. Terrified but thrilled. He said we'd make it work, that he'd help me leave, that we'd raise you together. He'd already found me an apartment. Linda was helping arrange legal representation. We had a plan. And then Michael died, she whispered. Construction accident at a job site. A support beam collapsed. He was killed instantly. 6 weeks before you were born. The grief in her voice was so raw, so present, that it was clear she'd never stopped mourning him. Your father knew, she said, looking at him now with something like hatred. He'd been having me followed. He had photos of Michael and me together. He confronted me 2 days after Michael's funeral when I was 8 months pregnant, devastated with nowhere left to go. He gave me a choice, she continued. He'd raise you as his own, tell everyone you were his daughter, maintain the appearance of a normal family. In exchange, I would never contact Linda again, never mention Michael's name, never tell you the truth. And if I ever tried to leave, he'd expose everything, tell the courts I'd been unfaithful, that you weren't his child, that I was an unfit mother. He'd take Evan away, and he'd make sure I never saw either of my children again. I had no money, she said. No job. No family left except Linda, who he immediately cut out of our lives. No support system. And I had a newborn baby girl who looked exactly like Michael and exactly like my mother. So I agreed. I signed away my freedom to protect you and Evan. She looked at me with devastated eyes. But he never forgave me. And he never forgave you for existing. Every time he looked at you, he saw Michael Carter, the man I loved, instead of him. He saw my mother, the woman who'd been right about him all along. He saw every moment of his humiliation, every blow to his ego, every reminder that he'd had to trap a woman to keep her because she'd never chosen him freely. So he punished you, she said, her voice breaking completely. Punished you for being born. Punished you for looking like them. Punished you for being living proof that I'd loved someone else. And I let him do it because I was terrified of losing you both. The room spun around me. Linda's hand found my shoulder, steadying me. When you were 7, my mother continued, I tried to leave. I packed bags, in secret contacted Linda, for the first time in years made plans to run. But he found out. He drained every bank account. He showed me court documents his lawyer had prepared, papers that would strip me of custody, paint me as an adulterous and unfit mother. He told me that if I left, Evan would grow up believing I'd abandoned him, and you'd end up in foster care, because he'd refused to raise another man's bastard once I was gone. So I stayed, she whispered. I stayed and watched him destroy you piece by piece, watched him erase your confidence, your joy, your sense of worth. And I did nothing because I was too weak, too frightened, too broken to fight him. She fell silent, exhausted by the weight of 30 years of secrets finally spoken aloud. I tried to speak, but no words came. Everything I'd believed about my family, my identity, my history, had just been rewritten in a single conversation. My father, the man I'd spent my whole life trying to please, wasn't my father at all. He was my mother's captor, my jailer, the man who'd tortured me for the crime of existing. My real father was Michael Carter, Linda's brother. The kind, creative man who died before I was born. The man whose loss Linda had been mourning all these years. Linda was my aunt, by blood. Not great-aunt. Eleanor wasn't just my grandmother. She was the woman whose fight for her daughter's freedom had cost her a relationship with that daughter and who'd died before she could help. And my mother had been a prisoner longer than I'd been alive. I'm so sorry, my mother sobbed. I'm so sorry I wasn't strong enough to protect you. I'm so sorry I let him hurt you. I'm so sorry for every moment of your childhood. There's one more thing, my father said, his voice cold and cruel, cutting through her apologies. One more secret your mother hasn't told you yet. My mother's face went white. No, don't. Please. If she's going to tell the truth, he said viciously, she should tell all of it. But one more secret remained. What secret? I asked, my voice hollow. I wasn't sure I could handle anything more, but I needed to know. I needed all of it. My mother was shaking her head frantically, tears streaming. "Please, it doesn't matter now. It won't change anything." "Tell her," my father commanded, his voice filled with vicious satisfaction. "Tell her why you really stayed. Tell her what you did." "What did you do, Mom?" I asked quietly. She collapsed into a chair, her whole body trembling. When she finally spoke, her voice was so broken I could barely understand her. "When you were 7, she began. "When I tried to leave, I told you that part. How I packed bags, contacted Linda, made plans. What I didn't tell you was that I was pregnant again." My blood ran cold. 3 months pregnant, she continued, not meeting my eyes. "I didn't tell your father. I didn't tell anyone except Linda. Because I knew it wasn't his. We hadn't been together that way in over a year. He had no interest in me anymore. But there was someone else." "Mom," I whispered, not sure I wanted to hear this. "A man I'd met at the grocery store, someone kind who reminded me of Michael. We'd talked a few times, had coffee twice. And one afternoon when your father was away on a business trip and I was so desperately lonely I couldn't bear it anymore, She broke down completely. "It only happened once, just once, and I got pregnant. Linda was helping me plan the escape," she said. "We were going to leave together, you and me and Evan and the baby I was carrying. Start over somewhere your father couldn't find us. But he discovered everything, found the packed bags, the documents Linda had hidden for me, the pregnancy test I'd thrown away." She looked up at me, her face ravaged by decades of guilt. "He told me I had a choice. I could leave with you and Evan, and he'd let me go. But he'd file for full custody of Evan immediately. He'd use the pregnancy as proof I was an adulteress, an unfit mother. He'd bring in lawyers, character witnesses, fabricated evidence. And he said," her voice broke, "he said if I left, he'd make sure the truth about you came out in court, that you weren't his daughter, that you were Michael Carter's bastard child. He said he'd make sure everyone knew, that it would be in public records, that you'd grow up knowing you were the product of an affair, that you'd be humiliated and marked forever." "But if I stayed," she whispered, "if I gave up the baby and stayed with him, he'd keep the secret. He'd raise you as his daughter, publicly maintain appearances, and you'd never have to know the truth. You'd grow up in a stable home with your brother." The room was spinning. "You gave up a baby." "I had an abortion." She said the words torn from somewhere deep and painful. "At 13 weeks, Linda took me to a clinic 2 towns over, paid for it with money your father didn't know about. I ended the pregnancy because he told me that was the price of protecting you and Evan. That was the price of keeping your secret." I couldn't breathe, couldn't process the magnitude of what she'd sacrificed. "He used it against me for years," she said. "Every time I questioned him, every time I tried to stand up for you, he'd remind me of what I'd done. 'You killed your own baby to save face,' he'd say. 'What kind of mother does that?' He made me believe I was a monster, made me believe I deserved everything he did to me." "You're not a monster," Linda said, her voice fierce despite her tears. "You were trapped by a monster. There's a difference." My father laughed, a cold, bitter sound. How touching. Everyone feeling sorry for poor Margaret, the victim. She made her choices. She cheated on me twice, once with Michael Carter, once with some nobody from a grocery store. She got pregnant both times with other men's children. And I was generous enough to forgive her, to keep her shameful secrets, to raise one bastard as my own. And this is the gratitude I get." "You didn't raise me," I said, finding my voice finally. "You tortured me. You used me as the emotional punching bag for 30 years because you couldn't handle the fact that my mother never loved you." "She made vows," he snarled. "She promised to be faithful, to honor me, to—" "You trapped her," I interrupted. "You controlled her, isolated her, threatened her. That's not a marriage. That's imprisonment." He turned his rage on me fully, now his face contorted with decades of resentment. "You don't get to judge me. You of all people. You're not even mine. You're Carter's spawn, a constant reminder that she loved a dead man more than she ever loved me. You have his face, his stubborn pride, his kindness." I finished. "His creativity, his ability to see value in other people. Yes, I hope I have all of that. because clearly I got nothing from you except a lesson in what cruelty looks like. I gave you a name, he said. I gave you legitimacy. I could have thrown you both out when I discovered the truth. I could have divorced her when you were born and let everyone know what she'd done, but I didn't. I sacrificed my pride, my dignity to give you a father and a normal life. You didn't give me a father, I said. You gave me an enemy. You spent 30 years punishing a child for the crime of being born, and you convinced yourself it was noble that you were some kind of martyr for taking on another man's child. But the truth is, you kept us because controlling us, hurting us, watching us suffer, that gave you power. That made you feel big. I turned to my mother, who was still crying silently. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. When I was older, when I left home, why didn't you tell me the truth then? Because I was still afraid, she whispered. Afraid he'd tell Evan the truth about you out of spite. Afraid he'd expose everything and humiliate you publicly. Afraid that if you knew, you'd hate me for all the times I stood by and watched him hurt you. I was a coward, Melissa. I've been a coward your entire life. I looked at Linda, who was watching me with eyes full of grief and love. You knew, I asked. When you found me, when you saw my shop online, did you know I was Michael's daughter? I suspected, she said gently. You looked so much like him. Same eyes, same hands, same creative spirit. But I wasn't sure until I met you in person and saw how old you were, did the math. Your mother had been pregnant when Michael died, and you were born 6 months after his death. It wasn't hard to figure out. Why didn't you tell me? Because it wasn't my secret to tell, she said. And because I knew if I told you without Margaret's permission, it would destroy whatever fragile relationship you still had with your mother. I wanted to give you the truth when you were ready to hear it from the person who should tell you. I sank into a chair, my legs no longer able to hold me. Everything, every moment of my childhood, every cruel word, every dismissal, every time I'd wondered why I was never good enough, all of it suddenly made horrible, perfect sense. He'd hated me because I was proof of his humiliation. Because I was Michael Carter's daughter, not his. Because I looked like Eleanor, the woman who'd seen through him and tried to save her daughter from him. Because every time he looked at me, he saw his failure to be the man my mother actually loved. And my mother, she'd stayed silent, trapped between protecting me from the truth and protecting me from him. She'd sacrificed another child, lived with that guilt, endured years of psychological torture, all to keep me from knowing I was born from love, rather than from the cold, calculated control of the man who'd claimed me as his own. The necklace, I said, suddenly remembering. The one Linda gave me, Eleanor's necklace. Linda nodded. Michael had it made for her for Eleanor as a birthday gift the year before she died. The inscription, "You are stronger than they will ever know," was Michael's message to his mother. He knew what she'd survived, what she'd overcome. After he died, Eleanor wore it every day. She told me before she died that she wanted it to go to Michael's child someday if he ever had one. She didn't know about you specifically, but she hoped. And when I realized who you were, I knew you were meant to have it. Michael never knew about me, I said quietly. He died before I was born, before Mom could tell him. He knew. My mother said, her voice steadier now. I told him I was pregnant 2 weeks before the accident. He was overjoyed. Terrified, but overjoyed. He spent those last 2 weeks making plans, figuring out how we'd make it work, how he'd support us, what kind of life we'd build together. The day he died, he'd just signed a lease on a bigger apartment, one with a room for you. She pulled out her wallet with shaking hands and removed a small, worn photograph, a picture of a man I'd never seen before. He had kind eyes, dark hair, a gentle smile. He looked nothing like the man who'd raised me. This is your father, she said, handing me the photo. Michael Carter. The man who wanted you, who loved you before you were even born, who would have been proud of everything you've become. I stared at the photograph, this stranger who was my father, my real father, the man whose blood ran through my veins, whose creativity I'd inherited, whose kindness had somehow survived in me despite 3 decades of cruelty designed to stamp it out. I look like him, I whispered. You are him, Linda said softly. Your talent, your resilience, your ability to create beauty from broken things, that's all Michael. He used to take damaged furniture from construction sites and restore it just like you do. He saw potential where other people saw trash. He believed in second chances and new beginnings. I looked up at the man who'd raised me, who'd tortured me for 30 years because I wasn't his, because my existence wounded his pride, because he could never forgive my mother for loving someone else. "You spent my entire childhood making me feel worthless," I said, "making me believe I had to work twice as hard to be worth half as much, telling me I was average, that I lacked potential, that I'd never amount to anything. You were a constant reminder," he said coldly. "Every day, every moment you were there, proof that she'd chosen someone else, that I was her second choice, that I'd never been good enough." "That's not my fault," I said. "I didn't choose to be born. I didn't choose my parents. You chose to stay. You chose to raise me. And instead of being a father, you chose revenge. I gave you a home." "You gave me hell," I interrupted. "And you convinced yourself it was justified because your ego couldn't handle the truth." I stood up, looked at all three of them. My mother destroyed by decades of impossible choices. The man who'd claimed to be my father twisted by resentment into something cruel. And Linda, who'd searched for me for 20 years because she'd loved her brother and wanted to honor his memory by protecting his child. For the first time, everything made sense. The silence that followed was absolute. I stood there looking at the three people who'd shaped my life in such devastating ways and felt the final threads of obligation snap. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice calm and clear. "I'm not paying a single dollar of your debts, not the mortgage on that house you fraudulently purchased in my name, not Evan's legal fees when the FBI prosecutes him, not your living expenses, not your credit cards, not anything. You created these problems through your own choices, your own crimes, your own cruelty. You'll face the consequences alone." My father started to speak, but I held up my hand. "The bank can foreclose on 8 and 47 Riverside Drive. I've already provided them with the forensic evidence proving the mortgage was obtained through identity theft. They're pursuing you now, not me. Evan can face federal prosecution for wire fraud and elder abuse. Marcus Chen's coalition of victims is filing a civil suit against both of you for restitution. I'll be testifying in that case about your involvement, Dad, about how you coached him and helped him use my identity. You're going to destroy this family over money." My father asked, his voice hoarse. "No," I said. "You already destroyed this family. I'm just refusing to be destroyed along with it." I turned to Harrison. "File everything. I want full legal separation from all debts, all obligations, all ties to them. I want restraining orders if necessary. I want every protection the law allows." Harrison nodded, already making notes. I looked at my mother, this woman who'd sacrificed so much and suffered so long. "Mom, I need you to make a choice. Right now. Are you staying with him or are you finally leaving?" She looked at the man who'd controlled her for 30 years, then back at me. "I don't have anywhere to go. No money, no—" I pulled an envelope from my purse and handed it to her. "This is a check for $50,000. It's made out to you only. I've also opened a bank account in your name at a bank across town. The information is in the envelope. He has no access to it. Can't touch it. Can't control it." Her hands shook as she took the envelope. "This isn't family money," I said quietly. "This is your money. Use it to get an apartment file for divorce, start over, or use it to stay here and keep surviving. That's your choice. But understand this, if you choose to stay with him, you're choosing to stay in this prison. I can't save you if you won't save yourself." She opened the envelope, saw the check, and started crying again. But this time there was something different in her tears. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of it. "Thank you," she whispered. I turned to Evan and my father. "Sign the documents. You have 24 hours. If you don't sign, every piece of evidence Harrison and Marcus have collected gets filed with law enforcement tomorrow morning. You'll both be arrested within the week." "And if we do sign," Evan asked, his voice small, "then I don't actively pursue criminal charges against Dad. The FBI still has their case against you, Evan, but I won't add to it unless you violate the no-contact order. You'll face federal prosecution for your scam operation, but Dad won't be charged as a co-conspirator. That's the deal." My father looked at the documents, at me, at the life he'd built through control and cruelty crumbling around him. "You've become just like your grandmother," he said bitterly. "Stubborn, self-righteous, destroying families." "No," I said. "I've become exactly like my father, Michael Carter, the man who saw beauty in broken things and believed in second chances, the man you could never be." I picked up my purse and walked toward the door, but there was still one place I needed to visit. I came back 1 week later after my father and Evan had signed the documents. The FBI had taken Evan into custody the day before formal arrest charges filed bail, set at $500,000 they couldn't afford. My father was facing the bank's lawsuit and the slow collapse of everything he'd built through control and lies. I didn't come to gloat. I came to say goodbye. The house looked even smaller in the January cold. Paint peeling worse than before, gutters sagging the lawn brown and dead. The place that had loomed so large in my childhood nightmares was just a shabby house on a declining street occupied by people whose power had evaporated the moment I stopped being afraid. I walked through the rooms one last time. The kitchen where I'd cooked 1,000 meals while being told I was worthless. The living room where Christmas dinner had exploded into the final confrontation. My old bedroom still painted the same pale yellow, still holding the ghost of the girl who'd once believed she was average. The walls were just walls. The rooms were just rooms. The man who'd controlled everything was just a man, and he looked smaller every time I saw him. I found my mother in the backyard, standing in the cold, without a coat, staring at nothing. "I'm leaving now," I said quietly. "For good. I won't be coming back." She turned and I saw she'd aged years in the past week. But there was also something different, a straightness in her spine that hadn't been there before. "I filed for divorce yesterday," she said. "Used the money you gave me to hire a lawyer, a good one. She says I have grounds for financial abuse, coercion, fraud. She says I'll be free within 6 months." "Good," I said simply. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you," she whispered. "I'm sorry for every day, every moment I stood by and watched him hurt you. I'm sorry I chose fear over courage. I'm sorry I wasn't the mother you deserved." I pulled her into a hug, felt her thin frame shaking, felt the weight of 30 years of impossible choices crushing her. "I forgive you," I said. "But you need to forgive yourself. You survived. That took strength, even if it doesn't feel like it. Now use that strength to finally be free." We stood there crying in the cold backyard where I'd once played alone, 2 women damaged by the same man, finally releasing each other from the prison of guilt and obligation. When I pulled away, I saw my father watching from the kitchen window, his face twisted with impotent rage. I walked back through the house one last time. He followed me to the front door. "You'll regret this," he called after me. "Walking away from your family. You think you're so strong, so independent, but family is all anyone has in the end. You'll be alone and you'll wish you'd—" I turned to face him. "You were never my family," I said calmly. "You were my jailer. You spent 30 years trying to convince me I was worthless, so I'd never realize I was strong enough to escape. But I did escape. I built a life you could never touch. And now I'm free." His face showed something I'd never seen before, the dawning realization that he'd lost. Completely. Irrevocably. He had no money, no power, no family who respected him, no leverage, no control. Just the empty shell of the life he'd destroyed through cruelty. I walked out, got in my car, and drove away. And then I drove toward the life I built with my own hands. 6 months later, I stood on the porch of my new house, watching the morning sun rise over the Atlantic Ocean. The house was small, just 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, that opened onto the living room wide windows that let in light from every direction. Nothing extravagant, nothing designed to impress anyone. Just a place where I could breathe, create, exist, without fear. I held a cup of coffee in both hands, feeling the warmth seep into my palms, and thought about the girl who'd stood outside a laundromat 18 years ago with 2 garbage bags and $347. I thought about the cold motel room, the triple shifts, the bone-deep exhaustion. I thought about every moment I'd been told I was average, worthless, not enough. And I smiled because that girl had become this woman, someone who'd built a multi-million-dollar company, who employed 12 people who owned this house outright, who'd survived everything designed to break her. For the first time in my life, I lived in a home where no one yelled, no one criticized, no one made me feel small. The silence wasn't loneliness, it was peace. The Freedom Fund had launched 3 months ago. I'd established it quietly, working with Harrison and a team of attorneys who specialized in financial abuse cases. The foundation offered legal assistance, emergency housing deposits, business microloans, and counseling for women escaping financially controlling relationships. In the first 90 days, we'd helped 47 women take their first steps toward independence. Last week, I'd received a letter from a woman named Patricia, 63 years old, who'd been married for 40 years to a man who controlled every dollar. The Freedom Fund had paid for her divorce attorney and her first month's rent in a new apartment. "You saved my daughter's life by saving mine," she wrote. "She watched me suffer for decades and thought that was what marriage looked like. Now she sees me building a new life at 63, and she knows she doesn't have to settle for someone who makes her feel small. Thank you for showing us both that it's never too late to choose yourself." I'd cried reading that letter, not from pain, but from the overwhelming sense that everything I'd survived, every moment of suffering, had purpose. My story could light the way for someone else's escape. A car pulled into the driveway just before noon, Linda carrying a bag of groceries and a photo album I'd never seen before. We sat on the porch with iced tea, and she opened the album carefully. "I wanted to wait until you were settled," she said, "until you'd had time to process everything, but I think you're ready now to meet your father." Photographs of Michael Carter filled the pages, young, laughing, covered in sawdust at a construction site. Holding a piece of furniture he'd restored, pride evident in his smile. Standing next to Eleanor, my grandmother, both of them looking at the camera with the same stubborn joy I saw in my own mirror. "You have his hands," Linda said softly, touching one of the photos. "Same long fingers, same way of holding tools. He used to take damaged furniture from job sites and bring it back to life. Said he couldn't stand seeing beautiful things go to waste." "Just like you," I whispered. "Just like him," she corrected gently. "Melissa, you are your father's daughter in every way that matters. His creativity, his resilience, his ability to see potential where others see only brokenness. The man who raised you tried to destroy those qualities, but they survived because they're in your blood. They're who you are." "Do you think he'd be proud?" I asked, my voice cracking. Linda took my hand, her eyes bright with tears. "Sweetheart, he'd be amazed. You're everything he was: kind, creative, determined. And you're everything he never got the chance to become. You lived the life he would have built if he'd survived. You're his legacy, his continuation. And yes, he'd be so, so proud." We sat in silence watching the waves, two women bound by blood and loss and survival. My aunt, my family, the connection to a father I'd never known, but who lived on in every choice I made, every piece I created, every woman I helped escape the kind of prison I'd survived. The sun moved across the sky. The ocean continued its endless rhythm. And I sat on my porch in my house, living the life I'd built with my own hands, finally understanding who I was and where I came from. For the first time in my life, I finally felt free. That's the end of Melissa's story, a story of a daughter who was thrown away, who built an empire from nothing, and who finally found freedom by choosing herself over the people who tried to destroy her. If this story moved you, if you felt Melissa's pain and celebrated her strength, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another story like this. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to save yourself? What would you have done in Melissa's position? Your stories matter, and this community is here to support each other. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end. Remember, you are never obligated to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. Until next time, take care of yourself and remember that you deserve peace.